Dr. Fuji has just completed his final calculations in the laboratory on Cinnabar Island. The genetic material is ready, the artificial womb is prepared, and Team Rocket's funding has made the impossible dream a reality. But what if Giovanni had never approached Fuji with that offer? What if Team Rocket's resources had been allocated elsewhere, leaving Fuji's research unfunded and his grief driven obsession with resurrection forever unrealized? In that moment, everything changes. The most powerful Pokemon that never should have existed remains exactly that, never existing at all, and the ripple effects reshape the entire Pokemon world in ways no one could have predicted. Without Mewtwo's creation, Giovanni's ambitions take a completely different trajectory. Instead of pouring Team Rocket's resources into genetic experimentation, he focuses entirely on capturing and controlling existing legendary Pokemon. This shift in strategy means that when Team Rocket encounters Mew in the jungles of Guyana, they don't see a source of genetic material, but rather the ultimate prize itself. Giovanni launches Operation Mew Capture, deploying his best agents, including a young scientist named Dr. Namba, who in canon would have worked on perfecting Mewtwo's psychic abilities. The mission fails spectacularly when Mew's playful nature leads it to teleport the entire Team Rocket expedition to random locations across the globe. But this failure teaches Giovanni a crucial lesson about the futility of controlling a mythical Pokemon through brute force. Dr. Fuji, meanwhile, remains consumed by his desire to bring back his daughter Amber, but without Team Rocket's backing, his research stagnates. He continues working at smaller facilities, making incremental progress on cloning technology, but never achieving the breakthrough that would have created Mewtwo. His obsession with Amber eventually leads him down a different path entirely. Instead of creating artificial Pokemon, he begins experimenting with using Pokemon abilities to preserve and extend human life. This research attracts the attention of other scientists, including Professor Oak, who becomes concerned about the ethical implications of Fuji's work. Oak's intervention leads to a series of heated debates in the scientific community about the boundaries between Pokemon and human research, ultimately resulting in stricter regulations that prevent the kind of unchecked experimentation that would have created Mewtwo in any timeline. The absence of Mewtwo fundamentally alters the landscape of legendary Pokemon encounters. Without the psychic powerhouse serving as a benchmark for artificial creation, other organizations that might have attempted similar projects never get the inspiration or proof of concept they need. The Pokemon G-Men, a secret organization that in various timelines has attempted to control legendary Pokemon, never develops their most ambitious projects because they lack the precedent of successful artificial legendary creation that Mewtwo represented. On New Island, the facility that would have housed Mewtwo's early development instead becomes a legitimate Pokemon research station. The island's unique ecosystem, rich with rare Pokemon attracted by the psychic energies that would have emanated from Mewtwo, develops differently. Without those psychic disturbances, the island becomes a natural sanctuary for psychic-type Pokemon, drawing researchers from around the world who establish it as the premier location for studying Pokemon telepathy and psychic abilities. Dr. Fuji eventually finds his way here, not as Mewtwo's creator, but as a researcher studying the natural psychic phenomena that occur when large groups of psychic types gather in one location. The butterfly effect reaches Team Rocket's structure itself. Without the massive resource drain of the Mewtwo project, Giovanni has additional funding to expand Team Rocket's operations in other directions. He establishes a stronger presence in Johto earlier than in canon, setting up operations that will later complicate the journeys of trainers in that region. The extra resources also allow him to retain more competent agents instead of relying so heavily on the bumbling trio of Jesse, James, and Meowth for important missions. This means that when a young trainer named Ash Ketchum begins his journey, he faces a more organized and better funded Team Rocket from the very beginning. Giovanni's focus shifts to capturing the legendary birds of Kanto. Without Mewtwo as his ace in the hole, he recognizes that controlling Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres would give Team Rocket unprecedented power over the region. He begins developing specialized technology designed to contain and control legendary Pokémon, working with scientists who would have been assigned to the Mewtwo project. This technology, while not as sophisticated as what would have been needed for Mewtwo, proves effective enough to pose a real threat to the legendary birds. The absence of Mewtwo also means that certain trainers who would have encountered the artificial Pokémon never experience that life-changing battle. Most notably, this affects trainers who in various timelines would have been invited to New Island or encountered Mewtwo in other circumstances. These trainers, lacking that particular crucible that would have tested their bonds with their Pokémon in such an extreme way, develop along different paths. Some become stronger through alternative challenges, while others never reach the heights they might have achieved with Mewtwo's unique trial. Professor Oak's research takes on new dimensions without the specter of artificial Pokémon creation hanging over the scientific community. He becomes more focused on understanding the natural bonds between Pokémon and trainers, leading to earlier discoveries about Pokémon evolution and the mysterious forces that govern it. His research into evolution stones and their properties accelerates, and he makes breakthrough discoveries about mega evolution, decades before it would naturally be uncovered in the Kalos region. These discoveries remain largely theoretical without practical application, but they lay important groundwork for future developments. The Cinnabar Island Laboratory, where Mewtwo would have been created instead, becomes a center for studying fossil Pokémon resurrection. Dr. Fuji's expertise in genetic reconstruction, originally intended for creating Mewtwo, gets redirected toward perfecting the process of bringing ancient Pokémon back to life. His work leads to significant improvements in fossil resurrection technology, making the process more reliable and less traumatic for the revived Pokémon. This advancement has far-reaching implications for paleontology and archaeology in the Pokémon world, as more complete and healthy ancient Pokémon can be studied and integrated into modern ecosystems. The absence of Mewtwo's psychic signature also affects wild psychic type Pokémon across the world. In canon, Mewtwo's immense psychic power created disturbances that could be felt by sensitive Pokémon across great distances. Without these disturbances, psychic types develop more naturally, and some species that would have been driven into hiding by Mewtwo's overwhelming presence instead flourish in areas where they would normally be rare. This leads to different distributions of psychic type Pokémon across regions, affecting the teams and strategies of countless trainers who encounter these Pokémon in unexpected places. Team Rocket's relationship with other criminal organizations also evolves differently. Without the Mewtwo Project as a show of technological superiority, Giovanni must prove Team Rocket's dominance through other means. This leads to more direct conflicts with organizations like Team Magma and Team Aqua in later years, as Giovanni cannot simply intimidate them with the threat of an all powerful artificial Pokemon. Instead, Team Rocket develops more sophisticated conventional technology and builds stronger networks of human agents, making them a more persistent but less overwhelmingly powerful threat. The ripple effects extend to the Pokemon League itself. Without Mewtwo serving as an example of what artificial enhancement could achieve, the League never needs to develop specific regulations about artificially created Pokemon in competitive battles. This might seem like a minor administrative detail, but it affects how the League approaches other edge cases involving Pokemon modification, genetic enhancement, and the use of artificial items to boost Pokemon abilities. The regulatory framework develops along different lines, potentially affecting the legality of certain training methods and enhancement techniques. Dr. Fuji's alternative research path leads him to make contact with other scientists working on life extension and genetic preservation. He begins collaborating with researchers in other regions, including some who are studying the relationship between Pokemon and human longevity. This network of scientists eventually makes discoveries about how certain Pokemon abilities can be used therapeutically for humans, leading to medical breakthroughs that save countless lives. Ironically, Fuji's inability to resurrect his daughter leads him to develop treatments that prevent other parents from losing their children to genetic diseases. The absence of Mewtwo also means that certain philosophical questions about artificial life and the rights of created beings never arise in the same way. The Pokemon world develops different ethical frameworks around genetic engineering and artificial life creation, frameworks that are less restrictive because they were never tested by the extreme case of a sentient, powerful being created in a laboratory and then abandoned by its creators. This has implications for future scientific developments and the way society approaches the boundaries between natural and artificial life. As Giovanni's focus shifts away from genetic engineering and toward capturing existing legendary Pokemon, he begins developing new strategies for dealing with Pokemon that are too powerful to control through conventional means. He invests in research on Pokemon behavior and psychology, hoping to find ways to manipulate legendary Pokemon into serving Team Rocket's interests voluntarily, rather than through force. This research leads to the development of sophisticated Pokemon psychology techniques that Team Rocket uses to recruit and retain Pokemon agents, making the organization more effective in some ways even without Mewtwo's raw power. The psychological manipulation techniques Giovanni develops become so effective that Team Rocket begins successfully turning wild Pokemon against their trainers in organized operations. Unlike canon, where Giovanni's schemes often relied on brute force, backed by Mewtwo's power, this timeline sees Team Rocket executing elaborate psychological operations that corrupt the bonds between trainers and their Pokémon. They develop specialized devices that amplify negative emotions in Pokémon, causing them to distrust their trainers and seek out Team Rocket as an alternative. This makes Team Rocket a more insidious threat because their operations are harder to detect and counter than the straightforward theft and intimidation tactics we know from canon. Giovanni's investment in Pokemon psychology research also leads him to discover certain Pokemon species that have natural mind manipulation abilities. He begins actively recruiting psychic type Pokemon like Alakazam, Hypno, and later Delcatty and Metagross for their mental influence capabilities. This creates a Team Rocket that operates more like a cult than a criminal organization, using Pokemon assisted psychological manipulation to recruit both human agents and Pokemon operatives. The organization becomes more dangerous in subtle ways, infiltrating legitimate Pokemon research facilities and trainer schools to identify promising candidates for recruitment. Without Mewtwo's example demonstrating the dangers of creating artificial Pokemon, other scientists in the Pokemon world feel emboldened to pursue their own genetic engineering projects. The Cinnabar Island laboratory explosion that occurs in canon still happens, but it destroys research into conventional Pokemon genetics rather than Mewtwo's development. This means the scientific community never receives the harsh lesson about the ethical boundaries of Pokemon creation that Mewtwo's existence provided. As a result, multiple other research teams begin developing their own artificial Pokemon projects, leading to a proliferation of created Pokemon with varying levels of success and stability. Some of these alternative artificial Pokemon projects succeed where Dr. Fuji failed, creating stable artificial Pokemon that integrate successfully into the ecosystem. Others fail catastrophically, producing Pokemon with severe psychological instability or genetic defects that make them dangerous to themselves and others. The Pokemon world becomes populated with a variety of artificial Pokemon species, some beneficial and some harmful, creating new categories of Pokemon that exist outside the traditional natural ecosystem. This fundamentally changes how Pokemon taxonomy and biology are understood, as researchers must develop new classification systems that account for artificially created species. The absence of Mewtwo also affects the development of other legendary Pokemon's relationships with humans. In canon, Mewtwo's rebellion and eventual reconciliation with humanity serves as a template for how other powerful Pokemon might relate to human society. Without this example, legendary Pokemon like Rayquaza, Dialga, and Palkia never have a precedent for the possibility of cooperation with humans who created or summoned them artificially. This makes later encounters between humans and legendary Pokemon more unpredictable, as these Pokemon have no framework for understanding human intentions when it comes to artificial creation or manipulation. Dr. Fuji's research into life extension through Pokemon abilities leads him to make contact with the researchers studying Celebi's time travel capabilities. Together, they develop theories about using Pokemon abilities to extend human life, not through resurrection, but through temporal manipulation that slows aging or reverses cellular damage. This research attracts the attention of other scientists working on immortality projects, including some who are studying Ho-Oh's resurrection abilities, and others investigating Dialga's time manipulation powers. The network of longevity researchers becomes a major scientific movement that reshapes how the Pokemon world approaches aging and death. The collaboration between life extension researchers leads to the development of Pokemon assisted medical treatments that can cure previously incurable diseases. They discover that certain Pokemon abilities can be channeled through specialized medical devices to repair genetic damage, regenerate lost tissue, and even restore memories in patients with degenerative brain conditions. These treatments become widely available, dramatically extending human lifespan and improving quality of life across the Pokemon world. Ironically, Dr. Fuji's failure to bring back his daughter leads to medical advances that prevent countless other families from experiencing similar losses. Giovanni's focus on capturing existing legendary Pokemon rather than creating artificial ones leads him to develop new strategies for dealing with Pokemon that cannot be controlled through conventional means. He begins studying the relationships between legendary Pokemon and the environments they protect, hoping to find ways to manipulate these Pokemon by threatening or promising to restore their natural habitats. This approach proves more effective than direct confrontation as Giovanni learns to present Team Rocket's activities as beneficial to legendary Pokemon's environmental concerns. The environmental manipulation strategy leads Team Rocket to become involved in legitimate conservation efforts as a cover for their operations. They begin funding Pokemon habitat restoration projects and environmental research, using these activities to gain access to legendary Pokemon territories and study their behavior patterns. This makes Team Rocket harder for law enforcement to combat, as their public activities appear beneficial while their hidden agenda involves exploiting the legendary Pokemon they claim to protect. The organization develops a sophisticated double identity that allows them to operate openly in scientific and conservation communities. Without Mewtwo's influence on Giovanni's strategic thinking, Team Rocket never develops the megalomaniacal ambitions that characterize the organization in later canon appearances. Instead of pursuing world domination through overwhelming force, Giovanni focuses on building a sustainable criminal empire based on information control, psychological manipulation, and strategic partnerships with corrupt officials. This makes Team Rocket a more persistent threat because they integrate themselves into legitimate power structures rather than operating as obvious antagonists. The different regulatory framework that develops around artificially created Pokemon affects how the Pokemon League approaches other edge cases involving Pokemon modification and enhancement. Without the precedent of Mewtwo's overwhelming power and subsequent rebellion, League officials are more permissive about genetic modifications, artificial enhancements, and technological augmentation of Pokemon abilities. This leads to the development of a competitive scene where modified Pokemon are common, fundamentally changing the nature of Pokemon battles and training. The more permissive regulatory environment encourages trainers to experiment with Pokemon enhancement techniques that would have been banned in canon. Cybernetic implants, genetic modifications, and artificial ability enhancements become accepted parts of competitive Pokemon training. This creates new categories of Pokemon competitions and leads to the development of specialized training facilities that focus on Pokemon augmentation rather than natural development. The Pokemon world becomes more technologically integrated, with the line between natural and artificial Pokemon abilities becoming increasingly blurred. Dr. Fuji's medical research network eventually makes contact with researchers studying the distortion world and Giratina's antimatter abilities. They theorize that antimatter manipulation could be used to reverse cellular aging at the quantum level, leading to true biological immortality rather than simple life extension. This research attracts funding from wealthy individuals and organizations seeking immortality, creating a new industry around Pokemon assisted life extension that becomes one of the most profitable sectors in the Pokemon world economy. The economic impact of Pokemon assisted medical treatments reshapes global commerce and international relations. Regions with access to Pokemon species that have healing or life extending abilities gain significant economic advantages, while regions lacking these Pokemon become dependent on imports of medical treatments. This creates new forms of international tension and cooperation as governments negotiate access to life saving Pokemon abilities and the medical technologies derived from them. Giovanni's psychological manipulation research eventually leads Team Rocket to discover Pokemon species that can influence human emotions and decision making processes. They begin using these Pokemon to manipulate stock markets, election outcomes, and business negotiations, generating enormous profits while remaining virtually undetectable. This version of Team Rocket becomes a shadow organization that influences global events through subtle psychological manipulation rather than obvious criminal activities. The proliferation of artificial Pokemon created by various research teams leads to ecological disruptions as these created Pokemon interact with natural ecosystems in unpredictable ways. Some artificial Pokemon prove beneficial, filling ecological niches that help stabilize damaged environments. Others become invasive species that disrupt natural Pokemon populations and food chains. The Pokemon world must develop new environmental management strategies to deal with the ecological impact of widespread artificial Pokemon creation. Without Mewtwo's example of a created Pokemon achieving independence and forming its own identity, the artificial Pokemon created by other researchers never develop the same level of self awareness and autonomy. They remain more like sophisticated biological machines than truly sentient beings, which raises different ethical questions about the treatment and rights of created life forms. Society develops frameworks for managing artificial Pokemon that treat them as property rather than individuals, leading to different moral and legal standards around created life. The absence of Mewtwo's philosophical impact means that questions about the nature of identity, purpose, and belonging for artificial beings are never fully explored in this timeline. The Pokemon world develops a more utilitarian approach to created life, viewing artificial Pokemon primarily as tools and resources, rather than individuals with their own rights and agency. This has long term implications for how society approaches artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and the creation of sentient beings in other contexts. And just like that, we see how the absence of one created Pokemon fundamentally reshapes the entire trajectory of scientific development, criminal organization, and ethical frameworks in the Pokemon world. Without Mewtwo's creation, Dr. Fuji redirects his research toward life extension, leading to medical breakthroughs that save countless lives. Giovanni builds a more sophisticated but ultimately more dangerous team rocket based on psychological manipulation rather than raw power. The scientific community pursues artificial Pokemon creation without the ethical constraints that Mewtwo's rebellion would have provided, leading to both beneficial innovations and dangerous disruptions. Most significantly, the Pokemon world never grapples with the profound questions about artificial life, identity, and the rights of created beings that Mewtwo's existence forced society to confront, developing along fundamentally different philosophical and ethical lines that prioritize utility over the recognition of artificial consciousness and autonomy. The ripple effects extend into the realm of legendary Pokemon encounters and their relationships with humanity. In canon, Mewtwo's existence as an artificial legendary establishes precedent for humans creating Pokemon of legendary power levels, influencing how other legendary Pokemon view humanity's technological capabilities. Without this precedent, legendary Pokemon maintain a different relationship dynamic with human civilization. Mew, never having its genetic material stolen and cloned, remains more trusting of human researchers and appears more frequently to assist with ecological crises. This leads to Mew becoming a more active participant in environmental restoration projects, working directly with Pokemon researchers to heal damaged ecosystems and restore extinct Pokemon species through its natural transformation abilities rather than through artificial cloning techniques. The absence of Mewtwo's psychic signature also means that other powerful psychic Pokemon like Lugia, Celebi, and the Lake Trio never sense the presence of an artificial legendary psychic entity. This changes their migration patterns and territorial behaviors, as they never need to investigate or respond to Mewtwo's presence in various regions. Lugia's appearances near the Whirl Islands become more predictable, allowing researchers to study its storm controlling abilities more systematically. This leads to breakthroughs in weather manipulation technology that help mitigate natural disasters and improve agricultural yields across multiple regions. The Kanto region develops differently without the constant threat of Mewtwo's presence in Cerulean Cave. The cave system becomes a major archaeological site where researchers discover ancient artifacts and fossil deposits that reveal new information about prehistoric Pokemon species. Without Mewtwo claiming the cave as its territory, excavation teams uncover evidence of ancient civilizations that worked alongside legendary Pokemon, providing insights into historical human Pokemon relationships that shape modern conservation policies. These archaeological discoveries lead to the establishment of the Cerulean Research Institute, which becomes a leading center for paleontological and anthropological studies in the Pokemon world. The psychological impact on trainers who never encounter or hear stories about Mewtwo creates a different training philosophy landscape. Without the cautionary tale of a Pokemon created by humans that rebels against its creators, trainers develop less awareness about the potential psychological trauma that artificial creation can inflict on Pokemon. This leads to more trainers attempting to artificially enhance their Pokemon through genetic modification, surgical augmentation, and technological implants. Some of these experiments succeed in creating more powerful Pokemon, but others result in Pokemon suffering from identity crises, physical complications, and behavioral disorders that the Pokemon healthcare system is unprepared to address. The absence of Mewtwo's influence on psychic type Pokemon training methodologies means that psychic trainers never learned the advanced techniques that observing Mewtwo's abilities could have taught them. Sabrina's psychic abilities remain more limited, as she never witnesses the full potential of psychic power that Mewtwo demonstrates. This affects her development as a gym leader and her ability to help other psychic trainers reach their potential. The Saffron City Gym becomes less influential in the psychic training community, and alternative psychic training schools in other regions gain more prominence. Will's Elite Four position in Johto becomes more secure, as he never faces the indirect pressure of knowing that more powerful psychic entities exist. His Xatu and Alakazam reach different levels of development without the cosmic awareness that comes from sensing Mewtwo's presence in the world. This changes the dynamic of Elite Four battles in Johto, as Will's team develops along different strategic lines focused on precision and tactical coordination rather than raw psychic power. The Indigo League Championship battles take on different characteristics without the underlying knowledge that artificially created Pokemon of legendary power are possible. Champions like Lance never develop contingency strategies for facing artificially enhanced Pokemon, focusing their training regimens entirely on natural Pokemon development and traditional battle techniques. This makes the championship more predictable, but also more focused on fundamental Pokemon training principles rather than preparation for unprecedented threats. Team Galactic's operations in Sinnoh proceed differently without Cyrus ever learning about successful, legendary Pokemon creation projects. His plans to create a new universe remain focused on capturing and controlling naturally occurring legendary Pokemon rather than attempting to create artificial ones. This makes his scheme both more traditional and potentially more achievable, as he concentrates all his resources on developing technology to control Dialga and Palkia rather than splitting his efforts between capture and creation projects. The absence of artificial legendary creation knowledge means Team Galactic never develops the advanced biotechnology that could have made their universe recreation project even more dangerous. The Distortion world's relationship with the regular Pokemon world remains more stable without Mewtwo's artificial presence, creating ripples in the fabric of reality. Giratina's role as guardian of the reverse world becomes less complicated as it never needs to monitor or respond to the existence of artificially created legendary entities that could potentially disrupt the balance between dimensions. This allows Giratina to focus more on its traditional role, leading to better stability in spatial and temporal phenomena across the Pokemon worlds. Research into Pokemon evolution takes different directions without the example of Mewtwo's incredible power levels achieved through artificial means. Scientists focus more heavily on understanding natural evolution processes, leading to breakthroughs in evolution stone technology, environmental evolution triggers, and the development of new evolution methods that work with Pokemon's natural biological processes. The absence of artificial enhancement examples means that evolution research remains more conservative, but also more sustainable and ethical. The development of mega evolution technology in Kalos proceeds more slowly without the precedent of artificially created Pokemon achieving legendary power levels. Researchers are more cautious about pushing Pokemon beyond their natural limits, leading to more extensive testing and safety protocols before mega evolution becomes widely available. This results in fewer mega evolution accidents and psychological trauma cases, but also means that the technology takes longer to perfect and distribute to trainers across different regions. Professor Sycamore's research into Pokemon bonds and evolution focuses more on natural phenomena rather than artificial enhancement, as he never encounters evidence that artificial Pokemon can achieve consciousness and emotional bonds equivalent to natural Pokemon. His studies concentrate on understanding how natural Pokemon form deeper connections with trainers, leading to discoveries about Pokemon empathy, communication, and emotional intelligence that improve training methods across all regions. The Battle Frontier facilities develop different challenge formats without the knowledge that artificially created Pokemon with legendary power levels are possible. Battle Factory rental Pokemon selections focus entirely on naturally occurring species, and the challenge levels are calibrated around natural Pokemon capabilities rather than accounting for potential artificial enhancements. This makes the Battle Frontier more accessible to average trainers, but also means that the ultimate challenges never reach the extreme difficulty levels that knowledge of artificial legendary Pokemon might have inspired. Hoenn's Team Aqua and Team Magma operations proceed without considering artificial legendary creation as a potential alternative to awakening Kyogre and Gruden. Both teams focus entirely on finding and controlling the natural legendary Pokemon, leading to more direct confrontation between the organizations as they compete for the same natural resources and ancient artifacts. The absence of artificial creation possibilities means their conflict becomes more intense and focused, potentially leading to more dangerous situations as both teams pursue increasingly desperate measures to awaken their respective legendary Pokemon. The Pokemon contest scene develops differently without the psychological complexity that Mewtwo's existence adds to questions about Pokemon identity and purpose. Contest coordinators focus purely on showcasing natural Pokemon abilities and the bonds formed through traditional training methods. This leads to contest formats that emphasize natural beauty, talent, and the harmony between trainer and Pokemon, rather than exploring themes about artificial enhancement or the nature of created versus natural Pokemon. Dawn's coordinator journey in Sinnoh takes on different characteristics as she never encounters the philosophical questions about Pokemon identity that Mewtwo's story raises. Her contests focus more on traditional performance elements, and her Piplup's development follows more conventional paths toward showcasing natural penguin Pokemon characteristics rather than exploring deeper themes about individuality and self-determination. And just like that, we see how the absence of one created Pokemon fundamentally reshapes not just scientific development and criminal organizations, but the entire philosophical, cultural, and strategic landscape of the Pokemon world. Without Mewtwo's creation, legendary Pokemon maintain different relationships with humanity. Archaeological discoveries proceed unimpeded in Cerulean Cave. Psychic training develops along more limited paths. And the very questions about artificial life and Pokemon consciousness that define modern Pokemon ethics never emerge, leaving society to develop along more traditional lines that prioritize natural development over artificial enhancement while missing the profound insights about identity, consciousness, and the rights of created beings that Mewtwo's existence would have provided. The Pokemon League competitions across all regions develop fundamentally different metagames without Mewtwo establishing the benchmark for artificial Pokemon power levels. Elite Four members and champions never need to consider strategies for countering artificially enhanced psychic abilities, leading to team compositions that focus entirely on naturally occurring type matchups and traditional battle strategies. Lance's team in Kanto and Johto maintains its dragon focused approach without ever developing contingency plans for psychic type threats that exceed natural capabilities. His Dragonite and Aerodactyl movesets prioritize coverage against other natural types rather than preparing for the overwhelming psychic power that Mewtwo would represent. Cynthia's Garchomp in Sinnoh never learns the specific anti-psychic techniques that would be necessary to counter artificially enhanced Pokemon, instead focusing on traditional ground and dragon-type advantages. This creates a different competitive landscape where champions specialize more deeply in their chosen types rather than developing broader defensive strategies. The Pokemon research community follows entirely different trajectories without Mewtwo's genetic template providing insights into artificial Pokemon creation. Professor Oak's research in Pallet Town focuses more heavily on natural Pokemon evolution and breeding patterns, leading to breakthrough discoveries about natural genetic variation that might never have been explored if artificial creation had been possible. His studies of Pokemon DNA concentrate on understanding natural mutation rates and environmental adaptation factors, resulting in new breeding techniques that maximize natural genetic potential rather than exploring artificial enhancement. Professor Elm in Johto develops his egg research along different lines, focusing entirely on natural reproduction cycles and the environmental factors that influence egg development. Without the knowledge that artificial Pokemon creation is possible, his research produces different insights about natural Pokemon birth rates and the conditions that optimize natural breeding success. Sylph Co. develops entirely different product lines without access to Mewtwo's genetic data and the technological breakthroughs that studying artificial Pokemon would provide. Their Pokeball technology advances through different research paths, focusing on improving capture rates for naturally occurring Pokemon rather than developing containment systems capable of holding artificially enhanced creatures. The Master Ball development follows a different timeline, potentially taking longer to achieve the same capture success rates because the research lacks the extreme test case that Mewtwo would provide. Sylph Co.'s relationship with Team Rocket proceeds differently, as the criminal organization never gains access to Mewtwo-related research data, changing the corporate espionage dynamics and leading to different conflicts over different technological secrets. The psychic-type Pokemon training community develops along more limited paths, without Mewtwo demonstrating the absolute ceiling of psychic abilities. Sabrina's gym in Saffron City maintains its focus on traditional psychic Pokemon like Alakazam and Kadabra, but her training methods never need to account for the possibility that psychic power could be artificially amplified beyond natural limits. Her gym challenges remain calibrated for naturally occurring psychic abilities, making them more predictable but also potentially less innovative in their approach to psychic type battle strategies. Will of the Johto Elite Four develops his psychic specialization without ever encountering the philosophical questions about artificial consciousness that Mewtwo's existence would raise, leading his training philosophy to focus purely on natural psychic development and traditional meditation techniques. The Kanto region's tourism industry develops different attractions around Cerulean Cave, which remains fully accessible to researchers and explorers without the dangerous presence of an artificially created super Pokémon guarding its depths. The cave becomes a popular destination for fossil hunters and geological researchers, leading to different archaeological discoveries that might have been impossible to uncover, with Mewtwo claiming the area as territory. Tourist routes through the cave system develop more extensively, and the local economy around Cerulean City benefits from increased scientific and recreational traffic. This accessibility leads to the discovery of additional fossil Pokemon species and rare mineral deposits that contribute to different technological developments in Pokemon related industries. Team Galactic's operations in Sinnoh proceed without the knowledge that artificial legendary Pokemon creation might be possible, focusing Cyrus's plans entirely on capturing and controlling naturally occurring legendary Pokemon like Dialga and Palkia. His research into Pokemon consciousness and emotion follows different paths, concentrating on understanding natural Pokemon psychology rather than exploring the artificial creation of consciousness. This leads to different experimental approaches in his attempts to create a new universe, potentially making his plans more focused on manipulating existing legendary Pokemon rather than considering the creation of artificial beings to serve his purposes. The absence of artificial creation knowledge makes his ultimate goals more dependent on successfully controlling natural legendaries, creating different pressure points in his organization's strategy. The Pokemon World Tournament concept develops differently without Mewtwo serving as the ultimate challenge that demonstrates artificially enhanced abilities. Tournament organizers calibrate their difficulty levels around naturally occurring Pokemon capabilities, leading to different championship formats and prize structures. The absence of artificially created Pokemon means that tournament metagames develop around traditional type matchups and natural ability combinations, rather than accounting for the possibility of artificially enhanced competitors. This creates a more predictable, but potentially more balanced competitive environment, where victory depends entirely on training natural Pokemon to their maximum potential rather than gaining access to artificial enhancements. International Pokemon research collaborations follow different priorities without the shared challenge of understanding artificial Pokemon creation. Research funding flows toward different projects, with more emphasis on natural conservation efforts and environmental Pokemon studies rather than genetic engineering safeguards and artificial consciousness ethics. The Pokemon research community develops different ethical frameworks that focus entirely on natural Pokemon welfare and habitat preservation rather than grappling with the rights and treatment of artificially created beings. This leads to different international agreements about Pokemon research and different regulatory approaches to genetic studies. The legendary Pokémon themselves maintain different relationships with human civilization without Mewtwo's existence, challenging traditional assumptions about the boundary between natural and artificial beings. Mew's status as the genetic ancestor of all Pokemon remains unchallenged by the existence of an artificial clone, potentially leading to different mythological and scientific understandings of Pokemon origins. The legendary Pokemon community, if such communication exists, never needs to address the philosophical questions about artificial members or the rights of created beings within their ranks. This maintains more traditional hierarchies and relationships among legendary Pokemon based entirely on natural origins and ancient roles. The Pokemon anime and media landscape develops different themes and storylines, without Mewtwo's story providing a template for exploring artificial consciousness and the ethics of creation. Pokemon movies focus on different conflicts and themes, emphasizing natural legendary Pokemon encounters and traditional trainer journeys, rather than philosophical questions about identity and belonging. The absence of Mewtwo's character arc means that Pokemon media never fully explores the potential for artificial beings to develop consciousness, emotion, and moral agency, leading to different cultural conversations about Pokemon intelligence and rights. Pokemon League regulations develop different rule sets without needing to address the potential for artificially created Pokemon in competitive play. League officials never need to establish guidelines for artificial Pokemon participation or develop testing methods to identify artificially enhanced competitors. This leads to simpler regulatory frameworks, but also means that the Pokemon League never develops the sophisticated ethical and legal structures that would be necessary to address questions about artificial consciousness and competitive fairness. And just like that, we see how the absence of one created Pokemon reshapes not only the scientific and criminal landscapes, but fundamentally alters the philosophical, cultural, and competitive evolution of the entire Pokemon world, leaving humanity to develop along more traditional paths that prioritize natural development over artificial enhancement, while never confronting the profound questions about consciousness, identity, and the rights of created beings that would have defined the ethical framework of human Pokemon relationships in a world where artificial life was possible. The Pokemon research community, without Mewtwo's existence, never develops the specialized containment and safety protocols that would become standard for handling psychic legendary Pokemon. Research facilities across all regions operate with different safety standards, focusing on environmental controls for natural legendary encounters, rather than the sophisticated psychic shielding and mental protection systems that Mewtwo's creation would have necessitated. This means that when researchers do encounter powerful psychic Pokemon like Alakazam colonies or wild Gardevoir populations, they lack the advanced protective measures and understanding of psychic manipulation that Mewtwo's existence would have forced them to develop. The absence of these safety protocols leads to different outcomes in psychic Pokemon research, with some studies becoming more dangerous, while others proceed more naturally, without the artificial benchmark of Mewtwo's overwhelming psychic abilities. The Kanto region's political landscape develops along different lines, without the New Island incident reshaping public opinion about Pokemon experimentation and artificial enhancement. The Indigo League maintains traditional approaches to legendary Pokemon encounters and never needs to develop the specialized response teams that would have been created after Mewtwo's rampage. This affects how the region handles other powerful Pokemon encounters, with law enforcement and league officials maintaining more conventional approaches rather than developing the sophisticated legendary Pokemon crisis management protocols that Mewtwo's existence would have forced into being. The political relationships between regions also develop differently, as international cooperation on legendary Pokemon incidents follows more traditional patterns without the precedent of artificial legendary Pokemon creating new categories of threats that require coordinated responses. Team Rocket's organizational structure and goals evolve along completely different trajectories without Giovanni's obsession with Mewtwo driving the organization's research priorities and resource allocation. The Rocket Empire focuses its efforts on more conventional Pokemon acquisition and territory expansion, rather than developing the advanced genetic laboratories and psychic research facilities that Mewtwo's creation required. This means Team Rocket never develops the sophisticated biotechnology capabilities that would have emerged from the Mewtwo project, leaving them as a more traditional criminal organization focused on theft and extortion rather than cutting edge genetic manipulation. Giovanni's leadership style and strategic vision develop differently without the personal investment in artificial Pokemon creation, potentially leading to different expansion patterns and different relationships with other criminal organizations across the regions. The impact on Team Rocket's relationship with other villainous organizations becomes significant without the technological advantages that Mewtwo's creation would have provided. Teams Magma and Aqua in Hoenn never encounter the advanced genetic research that Team Rocket would have shared or competed over, leading to different approaches in their own legendary Pokemon manipulation attempts. Team Galactic's research into legendary Pokemon and dimensional manipulation develops without access to the psychic research breakthroughs that studying Mewtwo would have provided to the scientific community. Team Plasma's philosophical arguments about Pokemon liberation never need to address the complex questions about artificial Pokemon rights that Mewtwo's existence would have raised, allowing their ideology to remain focused purely on natural Pokemon without grappling with the ethical implications of created consciousness. The Elite Four members across all regions develop different training philosophies and team compositions without Mewtwo serving as the ultimate benchmark for psychic Pokemon power. Psychic type specialists like Sabrina in Kanto, Will in Johto, and Lucian in Sinnoh never encounter the challenge of measuring their Pokemon against an artificial psychic legendary, leading them to focus their training on different aspects of psychic development. Their Pokemon reach different power levels and develop different techniques without the inspiration or intimidation factor that Mewtwo's existence would have provided. The psychic Pokemon training community as a whole develops different methodologies, emphasizing natural psychic development and traditional meditation techniques, rather than exploring the enhanced training methods that would have emerged from studying Mewtwo's artificial enhancement. Champion level trainers across all regions face different challenges and develop different strategies without Mewtwo representing the ultimate test of a trainer's abilities. Red's team composition and training focus develop along different lines without the need to prepare for potential encounters with artificial legendary Pokémon. Lance's approach to dragon Pokemon training never incorporates the lessons about artificial enhancement that Mewtwo's existence would have taught the Pokemon community. Cynthia's research into legendary Pokemon mythology and history focuses on different aspects without needing to address the implications of artificial legendary creation. Stephen Stone's interest in rare and powerful Pokemon develops different priorities, without Mewtwo representing a new category of artificial rarity that challenges traditional concepts of Pokemon uniqueness. The Pokemon contest and coordination community develops entirely different aesthetic and performance standards, without Mewtwo's dramatic presence influencing popular culture representations of powerful Pokemon. Contest spectacular events focus on natural Pokemon beauty and traditional performance arts, rather than incorporating the themes of artificial enhancement and created identity that Mewtwo's story would have introduced to Pokemon entertainment. Coordinators like May and Dawn develop different performance styles and choose different Pokemon partners, without the cultural influence of artificial Pokemon creation affecting popular preferences for contest Pokemon selection. The Battle Frontier facilities operate under different rules and present different challenges, without needing to account for the possibility of artificial legendary Pokemon participation. Frontier brains develop their facilities and training programs around natural Pokemon abilities and traditional battle strategies, rather than incorporating the advanced tactical considerations that Mewtwo's existence would have forced into competitive Pokemon battling. The Battle Tower, Battle Palace, and other facilities maintain more conventional challenge structures, without the need to develop specialized rules for artificial Pokemon or enhanced screening procedures for potentially modified competitors. Pokemon Rangers across all regions develop different conservation and protection strategies, without needing to address the ecological implications of artificial Pokemon introduction into natural habitats. Ranger training programs focus entirely on natural Pokemon behavior and ecosystem management, rather than developing the specialized protocols for monitoring and managing artificial Pokemon populations that Mewtwo's existence would have necessitated. The Ranger Union's policies and international cooperation frameworks develop along more traditional lines, emphasizing habitat preservation and natural Pokemon protection without the complex considerations about artificial species integration and artificial Pokemon rights that would have emerged in a world with Mewtwo. The Pokemon Mystery Dungeon phenomenon, if it exists in this timeline, operates under different rules and presents different challenges without Mewtwo's consciousness expanding influence, affecting the boundary between human and Pokemon identity. The mystery dungeons themselves might develop different properties and house different legendary Pokemon without Mewtwo's psychic influence, potentially affecting the dimensional instabilities that create these spaces. Pokemon who enter mystery dungeons encounter different challenges and develop different relationships with transformed humans without the philosophical framework about identity and consciousness that Mewtwo's existence would have established. International Pokemon League regulations develop simpler structures without needing to address the participation of artificial Pokémon in competitive events. The Pokemon World Championship operates under more straightforward rules, focusing on natural Pokemon abilities and traditional training methods rather than developing the complex verification systems and ethical guidelines that would be necessary to ensure fair competition in a world where artificial Pokemon enhancement is possible. This leads to different competitive metas and different strategic approaches among top level trainers who focus their preparation on natural Pokemon development rather than considering the implications of artificial enhancement. The Pokemon storage system technology develops along different lines without Dr. Fuji's genetic research contributing to digital Pokemon storage innovations. Pokemon centers and PC systems focus on more conventional storage and healing technologies, rather than incorporating the advanced biological understanding that would have emerged from Mewtwo's creation process. This affects how Pokemon are stored, transported, and healed across all regions, with technology advancing at different rates and focusing on different aspects of Pokemon care and management. The legendary Pokemon themselves maintain different territorial and behavioral patterns without Mewtwo's presence, disrupting traditional legendary hierarchies and relationships. Mew continues its elusive existence without needing to grapple with the existence of its artificial clone, potentially leading to different interactions with humans and different involvement in regional conflicts. Other psychic legendary Pokemon like Latios and Latias, Jirachi, and Celebi develop different relationships with human civilization without Mewtwo's example of artificial consciousness challenging their understanding of the boundary between natural and created beings. The Pokemon world's approach to genetic research and biotechnology develops more slowly and cautiously without the dramatic example of Mewtwo's creation demonstrating both the potential and the dangers of artificial Pokemon development. Research institutions focus on more conventional breeding programs and natural Pokemon enhancement rather than pursuing the cutting edge genetic manipulation that would have emerged from studying Mewtwo's artificial genome. This leads to different medical advances and different approaches to Pokemon healthcare, with veterinary science developing along more traditional paths rather than incorporating the revolutionary biological insights that artificial Pokemon creation would have provided. And just like that, we see how the absence of one created Pokemon fundamentally reshapes every aspect of the Pokemon world, from individual trainer journeys and team compositions to international politics and scientific development, creating a timeline where humanity and Pokemon develop together along more natural paths without ever confronting the profound questions about artificial consciousness, created identity, and the ethics of genetic manipulation that would have defined the moral and philosophical framework of their shared world, leaving both species to explore their potential through traditional bonds and natural evolution, rather than pushing the boundaries of what it means to be alive, conscious, and deserving of rights in a universe where the line between natural and artificial consciousness remains forever uncrossed. Without Mewtwo, the entire trajectory of Team Rocket changes. Giovanni, without the ultimate weapon he envisions Mewtwo to be, would likely continue his operations with a heavier reliance on traditional criminal enterprises and a more diverse range of powerful natural Pokémon. His focus might shift from genetic experimentation to acquiring legendary Pokémon through conventional means, perhaps even attempting to capture the Beast of Johto or the Weather Trio, albeit with less success given their immense power and the intervention of trainers like Ash. The scientific division of Team Rocket, led by people like Dr. Fuji, would either dissolve or pivot to other areas of research, perhaps focusing on mind control devices like the ones used on Lugia and its child, or developing enhanced Pokeballs. This means no cloning facilities, no direct pursuit of the legendary Mew for its DNA, and certainly no Giovanni with a Mewtwo under his command in future battles, which fundamentally alters his standing as a villain. The anime's Team Rocket trio, Jesse, James, and Meowth, continue their bumbling pursuits of Ash's Pikachu, but their overarching goal of delivering powerful Pokemon to Giovanni would never culminate in the promise of a Mewtwo level asset. Their failures would feel less consequential in the grand scheme of Team Rocket's operations, as the organization itself would be less reliant on any single ultimate weapon. The Johto region saga unfolds next, and without Mewtwo's influence, the conflicts here maintain their canonical focus. The emergence of the legendary beasts, Entei, Raikou, and Suicune, would still be a central theme, with their interactions with humans remaining largely unchanged. Ash's journey through Johto, his gym battles, and his participation in the Silver Conference would play out much like canon, but with a subtle difference. The underlying fear of powerful man made Pokemon is absent from the collective consciousness. The discussions around legendary Pokemon would center on their natural power and their role in the ecological balance, rather than the ethical implications of their creation. The Lugia arc, where Team Rocket attempts to capture the legendary guardian of the seas, would still occur, showcasing the lengths Giovanni's organization would go to for power, but again, without the parallel storyline of genetic engineering. The Unown's mysterious powers and their connection to Molly Hale would still create the illusionary world, and Ash's battle against the illusionary Entei would proceed as we know it, a testament to the emotional power of a child's wish, untainted by the shadow of scientific hubris. Hoenn introduces us to the ancient legends of Groudon and Kyogre, and the ecological balance they represent. Without Mewtwo's existence, the Team Aqua and Team Magma conflicts, centered around controlling these titans to reshape the world, would play out exactly as canon. The environmental themes are strong here, and the natural forces at play are the primary antagonists. Rayquaza's role as the arbiter of peace between the two behemoths remains unchanged. Ash's Hoenn journey, his alliance with May and Max, and his eventual participation in the Evergrande Conference would continue as canon, complete with his iconic battles and growth as a trainer. The absence of Mewtwo means that the scientific community's focus in Hoenn, particularly at facilities like the Devon Corporation, would remain primarily on natural resources and energy solutions, rather than venturing into advanced genetic research. Stephen Stone, the Steel-type champion, still pursues his passion for rare stones and archaeology, with no new threats from artificial Pokémon to distract him from his geological interests. The Battle Frontier arc, a transitional period between Hoenn and Sinnoh, would also largely proceed like canon. Ash's challenge against the various frontier brains, culminating in his battle against Brandon and his legendary Regis, would test his skills and his bond with his Pokémon. The themes of dedication, strategy, and perseverance are paramount here. The focus remains on the natural power of legendary Pokémon and the skill of trainers in harnessing their abilities. The appearance of other legendary Pokémon like Articuno under Nolan's command reinforces the idea of powerful natural creatures being partners to skilled trainers, a concept that stands in stark contrast to the idea of artificial creation. The dynamic between Ash and Scott, the founder of the Battle Frontier, would maintain its canonical progression as Scott observes Ash's potential and growth. Sinnoh brings us Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, the legendary trio representing time, space, and antimatter. The conflicts surrounding these deities, orchestrated by Team Galactic and Cyrus, would unfold exactly as canon. Cyrus's nihilistic desire to destroy and recreate the world would still be driven by his own warped philosophy and the manipulation of these ancient powers, rather than any advanced genetic engineering. Ash's journey through Sinnoh, his rivalry with Paul, and his participation in the Lily of the Valley Conference would proceed with intense battles and character development, culminating in his semi-final loss to Tobias and his legendary Darkrai and Latios. This loss, while painful, still serves as a crucial learning experience for Ash, emphasizing the challenges of facing truly powerful Pokémon, whether natural or artificially enhanced. The absence of Mewtwo means that the concept of a created legendary like Arceus, the alpha Pokémon, would retain its singular divine status without any echoes of human-made counterparts. Cynthia, the Sinnoh champion, still stands as a formidable opponent, her team of Garchomp, Spiritomb, and others showcasing the pinnacle of natural Pokémon training. Unova introduces us to Reshiram and Zekrom, the Tau trio, representing ideals and truths. Team Plasma's ambitions, spearheaded by Ghetsis and N, would still revolve around liberating Pokémon from trainers and controlling the legendary dragons. Their methods would remain focused on manipulation and their own philosophy rather than genetic experimentation. Ash's journey through Unova, his participation in the Virtus Conference, and his interactions with new friends and rivals would continue as canon. The introduction of Team Plasma's advanced technology, including their mind control devices for Pokémon, would still highlight the dangers of misusing technology, but without the specific context of creating life. The conflict between ideals and truths and the moral complexities of the relationship between humans and Pokémon would remain the core themes of the Unova saga. The legendary Meloetta's arc would also play out as canon, focusing on the power of music and friendship. Kalos introduces the concept of mega evolution, a powerful temporary transformation that enhances a Pokémon's capabilities. This mechanic, tied to the bond between trainer and Pokémon and the power of keystones and megastones, would develop exactly as canon, completely independent of Mewtwo's existence. The ultimate weapon, created millennia ago by AZ, still poses a threat to the region, and Team Flare's plot to harness its power would unfold as we know it. Ash's journey through Kalos, his development of Ash Greninja, and his deep rivalry with Lan would all happen like canon. The Mega Evolution special episodes, detailing Alan's quest to defeat all Mega Evolved Pokémon, would still be a central narrative, culminating in his battle against Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre. The theme of natural power and the bond between trainer and Pokemon would be even more accentuated in a world where artificial Pokemon are not part of the discussion. Ash's heartbreaking loss against Alain in the Lumiose Conference, despite his powerful Ash Greninja, would still serve as a pivotal moment in his growth, pushing him to further master his bond and his skills. Alola brings us the regional variants and Z moves, powerful one-time attacks that require a strong bond with a Z-ring and Za Crystal. These mechanics are inherently tied to Alolan culture and the island's natural energy, and thus their development would be entirely unaffected by Mewtwo's absence. The Ultra Beasts, extra-dimensional Pokemon that emerge from Ultra Wormholes, would still appear as a new and mysterious threat. The Ether Foundation's research into these creatures and their ultimately misguided attempts to control them would proceed as canon, with Lucamine's descent into obsession and her eventual rescue by Ash and company. The underlying themes of family, nature, and the unknown would be central to the Alolan saga. Ash's victory in the Alola League, his first official league win, would still be a monumental achievement, a testament to his growth and his unconventional approach to training, and a significant milestone in his journey. The legend of Solgaleo and Lunala and their role in protecting the Alola region would remain pristine, untouched by any artificial counterparts. Finally, in the World Coronation Series era, Ash's journey to become monarch would still be the central focus. The introduction of Gigantamax and Dynamax, unique to the Galar region, would proceed as canon. These phenomena are tied to the region's unique energy and the power spots across the land. The conflicts with Chairman Rose and Eternatus would still occur, with Eternatus being an ancient legendary Pokemon tied to the Galar region's history, not a created one. Ash's rise through the ranks, his battles against powerful trainers like Leon, Cynthia, and Stephen Stone would still be incredible showcases of skill and strategy. His ultimate victory against Leon in the Masters 8 tournament, using his iconic team including Pikachu, Dragonite, Gengar, Lucario, Sirfetch'd, and Dracovish, would be the culmination of his life's work, a testament to his bond with his Pokemon, his dedication to training, and his unwavering spirit. Without Mewtwo's existence, the World Championship would celebrate the pinnacle of natural Pokemon battling, with trainers and their naturally evolved partners pushing the boundaries of what is possible. The absence of Mewtwo means that the final battle, and indeed all battles, would lack the subtle philosophical undercurrents of confronting artificial life, focusing instead purely on the skill, strategy, and bonds between trainer and Pokemon. The entire ethical landscape of the Pokemon world would be different. Debates about the rights of artificial Pokemon, the morality of genetic engineering, and the very definition of consciousness would never have become mainstream. Scientists would still be pushing boundaries, but in directions that align with natural biological processes, studying evolution, adaptation, and the unique properties of natural Pokemon. The fear and awe associated with powerful Pokemon would stem entirely from their natural abilities, their ancient origins, or their legendary status, rather than from their creation by human hands. Team Rocket, while still a formidable criminal organization, would never have the same kind of ultimate, scientifically engineered threat to wield. Giovanni's ambition would be grounded in more traditional power grabs and resource acquisition rather than the pursuit of a super clone. The legend of Mew would remain purely that, an ancient, elusive, and powerful mythical Pokémon without the burden of being the genetic template for a human made rival. And so, in this world without Mewtwo, the narrative of humanity and Pokemon unfolds with a different kind of purity. The focus remains steadfastly on the natural world, on the innate power of Pokemon, and on the profound organic bonds that form between trainers and their partners. The challenges are still immense, the villains still menacing, and the victories still hard won, but the philosophical underpinnings of it all are simpler, more rooted in the classic themes of nature versus nurture, good versus evil, and the enduring power of friendship. The journey for Ash, the various champions and gym leaders, and indeed all trainers, is one of mastering the natural world, understanding its rhythms, and pushing the boundaries of what their naturally evolved Pokemon can achieve. The world finds its heroism not in overcoming the consequences of scientific hubris, but in celebrating the raw, untamed, and beautiful power that has always existed between humans and the incredible creatures they call friends and partners. The shadow of artificial creation never falls, and the light of natural evolution shines unimpeded, shaping a Pokemon world that is both familiar and fundamentally transformed. The very fabric of Kanto's early challenges would feel this absence. Without the looming threat, the mysterious experiments, and the eventual escape of Mewtwo, a significant portion of Team Rocket's narrative arc in the early days would be fundamentally altered. Giovanni, instead of investing vast resources into the Mewtwo project, focuses his considerable intellect and financial power on more conventional, albeit still nefarious, schemes. His pursuit of rare and powerful Pokemon, his control over Celadon Game Corner, and his ambition to control the Kanto region would remain, but the ultimate weapon, the trump card he always sought, would be different. Perhaps he would focus on capturing one of the legendary birds, Articuno, Zapdos, or Moltres, to fulfill his desire for ultimate power. This shift in focus would mean fewer resources diverted to Cinnabar Island's secret lab, perhaps even preventing the lab's eventual destruction, or at least changing the circumstances of its demise. The storyline involving Blaine, the Cinnabar gym leader, would also be impacted. His connection to the creation of Mewtwo, however tenuous in some interpretations, would be entirely absent. His character would remain the fiery, riddle-loving trainer, but the underlying melancholy or regret, often associated with his past involvement, would never materialize. The research facilities on Cinnabar Island would continue to operate, perhaps focusing on more traditional Pokemon research, genetic studies of natural species, or even advanced breeding techniques, rather than the controversial cloning project. The island itself, already a volcanic hotspot, might become a more prominent center for fire-type Pokemon research and training, leaning into its natural environment without the shadow of a clandestine laboratory. The impact on Team Rocket's overall trajectory is perhaps the most profound. Without Mewtwo, their ultimate defeat at the hands of Ash and his friends, or Red in the game continuity, would not carry the same weight of dismantling a super weapon. Their downfall would be more about systemic collapse, their criminal empire crumbling due to relentless opposition and internal strife, rather than the loss of a single devastating asset. This could mean a longer, more drawn out conflict with Team Rocket, as they would not have a single point of failure in the form of Mewtwo's rebellion. Giovanni, being the shrewd tactician he is, might adapt, seeking other avenues for power, possibly even extending his reach into other regions earlier than in canon, attempting to establish footholds in Johto or even beyond, without the singular focus on Kanto's ultimate weapon. The legendaries of Kanto, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres would likely play a more central role in Giovanni's plans. His attempts to capture or control them would intensify, leading to potentially more direct confrontations with these powerful beings. This could even lead to new canon events where Ash or Red have to actively protect these legendary birds from Team Rocket's clutches rather than their encounters being more incidental or part of a larger natural phenomenon. The balance of power in Kanto would be maintained by the natural order and the strength of its trainers, not by the existence of a genetically engineered super Pokémon. Moving beyond Kanto, the ripples continue. In Johto, the narrative surrounding Lugia and Ho-Oh, the guardians of the skies and seas, would remain untouched by any Mewtwo-related events. The conflict with Team Rocket in Johto, which largely revolves around their attempts to revive their organization and exploit local Pokémon like the red Gyarados, would proceed largely as it does in canon, but without the lingering specter of their past failures with Mewtwo. The focus would be entirely on their Johto-specific schemes, their desperation to regain their former glory, and their eventual defeat, which would feel like a more complete dismantling of their operations without a prior, even greater, failure to overshadow it. The legendary beasts, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, would also retain their pure mythical status, their origins tied to the burning of the Brass Tower and Ho-Oh's intervention without any external scientific context. Their elusive nature and their role as protectors of Johto would be solely driven by their natural powers and their ancient history. Hoenn, a region defined by its ancient legends and the conflict between Groudon and Kyogre, would be entirely unconcerned with artificial Pokémon. Team Aqua and Team Magma's goals, centered around expanding land or sea, are deeply rooted in the natural geography and mythical history of the region. Their ultimate aim is to harness primal powers, not engineered ones. This means that the philosophical debates in Hoenn would remain squarely focused on environmentalism, the balance of nature, and the consequences of tampering with ancient forces, without the added layer of bioethics. Stephen Stone's geological insights and Wallace's artistic appreciation for Pokémon would be the guiding principles of the region's champions, untainted by the concept of man-made power. In Sinnoh, the creation myths involving Arceus, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, and the efforts of Team Galactic to reshape the universe would also proceed like canon. Cyrus's nihilistic ambition to create a new world, one devoid of spirit, is a cosmic level threat, far removed from the terrestrial concerns of genetic engineering. The Lake Guardians, Otouxi, Mesprit, and Azelf, with their powers over knowledge, emotion, and willpower, would be integral to the region's balance, their mystical origins unquestioned. The absence of Mewtwo means that the very concept of artificially creating a deity-level Pokémon would not exist in the collective consciousness, making Cyrus's plans seem even more audacious and unprecedented in their scope. Unova, a region that often explores themes of idealism versus realism and the relationship between humans and Pokemon, would also feel the subtle shift. N's philosophy, centered on liberating Pokemon from trainers, is rooted in the perceived exploitation of natural beings. Without Mewtwo, there would be no direct counterexample of a Pokemon created for exploitation to fuel this argument. N's journey and his eventual understanding of the beneficial bonds between humans and Pokemon would remain a poignant exploration of empathy and freedom, without the implicit question of whether man made Pokemon deserve the same consideration. Team Plasma's ultimate goal of controlling Zekrom or Reshiram would be a power play over natural forces, not a scientific manipulation. Kalos, with its emphasis on mega evolution and ancient history, would continue its narrative largely unperturbed. The ultimate weapon, constructed by AZ, is a relic of an ancient war, a destructive force of immense power, but one that harnesses natural energies, not genetic manipulation. Professor Sycamore's research into mega evolution is about unlocking latent potential within existing Pokemon, a celebration of their natural power, not a creation of new ones. Lyssandra's plan to purge the world and reset it is born of his despair at humanity's flaws, a philosophical stance, not a scientific one focused on engineered beings. The existence of Zygarde, the order Pokemon, and its role in maintaining the ecosystem would be purely a matter of natural balance, unaffected by any artificial counterparts. Even in Alola, a region deeply imbued with spiritual reverence for its guardian deities and ultra beasts, the absence of Mewtwo would lead to a subtle yet significant difference. The Ether Foundation, under Lucamine's misguided leadership, focuses on opening ultra wormholes and controlling ultra beasts, beings from other dimensions. Their experiments, while ethically dubious, are about manipulating interdimensional travel and controlling existing, albeit alien, life forms, not creating new ones. The concept of an artificially created super Pokemon would not be part of their scientific repertoire or their ethical considerations. The focus would remain on the environmental impact of Ultra Beasts and the preservation of Alola's unique ecosystem, making the conflict a purer struggle between protection and exploitation of natural phenomena. In Galar, the lore of Dynamax and Gigantamax and the history of the Darkest Day are deeply intertwined with the region's energy source, the Wishing Stars, and the mythical Pokemon Eternatus. Chairman Rose's ambition to solve Galar's energy crisis by awakening Eternatus is a monumental undertaking involving natural, albeit dangerous, phenomena. The very idea of an artificially created Pokemon to solve this problem would not exist in this timeline. The challenges faced by trainers in Galar, from the gym challenge to the battle against Eternatus, would be about mastering the inherent power of the Galar region and its unique energy without any artificial intervention. The theme of heritage and tradition, so central to Galar, would shine even brighter without the shadow of modern, controversial scientific creation. And finally, Paldea, with its ancient mysteries, paradoxical Pokemon, and the phenomenon of terrestrialization, would continue its exploration of the past and future through its own unique lens. The Area Zero expeditions, the research into the Terrastal phenomenon, and the encounters with the Paradox Pokemon are all about understanding naturally occurring, albeit extraordinary, aspects of the Paldean ecosystem. The very existence of Koraidon and Miraidon, whether as ancient or future versions of Cyclizar, reinforces the theme of evolution and temporal anomaly rather than artificial creation. The ethical questions surrounding AI and the potential for a rogue AI, as seen in the Professor Turo Sada narrative, would still exist, but they would be focused on artificial intelligence in technology, not artificial life in Pokemon. The concept of creating a new, powerful Pokemon through genetic engineering would simply not be a part of the scientific or ethical landscape. The absence of Mewtwo would also subtly reshape the careers and philosophies of various prominent trainers. Blue, as the rival and eventual Kanto champion, would still be driven by his ambition to be the best. His team, known for its diverse type coverage and raw power, would continue to evolve, but his understanding of power would be purely derived from natural training and strategic mastery. The psychological edge of facing a potential Mewtwo in battle, or the knowledge of its existence, would never factor into his training regimen or his worldview. Lance, the Dragon Master and eventual champion of the Indigo League, would continue to embody the strength and majesty of natural, powerful Pokemon. His awe for dragon types and his commitment to protecting the natural world would be even more pronounced, as there would be no artificial legend to challenge his philosophical framework. His battles would be pure showcases of natural power and the deep bond he shares with his dragons, without any underlying commentary on genetic manipulation. Cynthia, the Sinnoh champion, known for her deep understanding of Pokemon history and mythology, would continue to be a beacon of intellectual and physical strength. Her battles are often described as philosophical dances, a test of understanding and strategy. Without Mewtwo, her appreciation for the natural origins of legendary Pokemon and the inherent power of all species would be even more central to her character. She would likely be one of the strongest proponents of natural evolution and the balance of the ecosystem, her wisdom untempered by the ethical dilemmas of artificial life. Even Ash Ketchum, our perpetual protagonist, would experience a subtly altered journey. His core motivation to become a Pokemon master would remain. His deep bond with Pikachu and his other Pokemon would be the driving force behind his strength. But the philosophical undercurrents of his journey would be simpler. He would never have to grapple with the existence of a Pokemon created solely for power, a being that questions its very identity. His encounters with legendary Pokemon would be moments of pure wonder and respect for ancient, powerful beings. His understanding of strength would be solely focused on training, friendship, and the inherent potential within every natural Pokemon. The lessons he learns, the growth he experiences, would be entirely rooted in the natural world, in mastering the bonds with creatures that have evolved over millennia. The Pokemon world, in this altered timeline, would be a universe where the wonders and challenges are purely those of nature, of ancient legends, and of the incredible, diverse life that has evolved on its own. The triumphs would be about overcoming natural obstacles, understanding natural phenomena, and forging natural bonds. The villains would still exist, but their ambitions would be grounded in more traditional power, wealth, or ideological control rather than the pursuit of a manufactured god. The scientific community would push boundaries, but in directions that respect and enhance the natural order, rather than challenging the very definition of life. The world would find its heroism not in rectifying the mistakes of scientific hubris, but in celebrating the raw, untamed, and beautiful power that has always existed between humans and the incredible creatures they call friends and partners. The shadow of artificial creation never falls, and the light of natural evolution shines unimpeded, shaping a Pokemon world that is both familiar and fundamentally transformed. And just like that, we see how one decision changed everything. If Mewtwo was never created, then Giovanni would have focused on natural legendaries. Blaine would have a simpler past. Team Rocket's downfall would be a systemic one, and Ash's journey would be a purer celebration of natural bonds, cementing the idea that the greatest power lies not in what we can create, but in what already exists and what we learn to cherish. The entire narrative of the Pokemon world would be a testament to the enduring power of nature and the profound connections between trainers and their naturally evolved partners. The philosophical depth surrounding artificial life would be entirely absent from the collective consciousness, leading to a world where the wonder of new discoveries focuses on undiscovered species, ancient ruins, and the unraveling of natural mysteries. This ripples into the very fabric of the Pokemon League itself. Without the ultimate weapon of Mewtwo, Giovanni's plans for global domination would inevitably shift. He is depicted in canon as a shrewd, resourceful, and utterly ruthless leader, not one to simply give up because a single project failed. Instead of pouring vast resources into the genetic engineering of a super Pokemon, his ambitions would likely turn towards the acquisition and control of other naturally occurring legendary Pokemon. We saw glimpses of this ambition in the anime and games, with Team Rocket's various schemes involving Lugia, Celebi, and even the Lake Trio. This time, however, these attempts would be far more focused, more organized, and more dangerous without the single minded pursuit of Mewtwo. Consider the Johto region. In canon, Team Rocket's activities there, particularly their takeover of the Goldenrod radio tower and their attempts to force the evolution of Magikarp, were desperate last-ditch efforts following Giovanni's disappearance after the Kanto League. Without the catastrophic failure of the Mewtwo project and the subsequent disarray it caused in Team Rocket's Kanto operations, Giovanni would remain a far more active and present threat. His focus would likely turn to the legendary beasts Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, or even the tower duo Ho-Oh and Lugia. The mythos of Johto is deeply intertwined with these powerful beings, and Giovanni, ever the opportunist, would certainly recognize their potential. This means that the events of the Johto anime arc, while still featuring Team Rocket, would have a much more significant and menacing presence from the organization's leader. Jesse, James, and Meowth would still bungle their way through their daily lives, providing comic relief, but the overarching threat from Team Rocket would be far greater. Ash and his friends might find themselves caught in the crosshairs of Giovanni's more direct operations, perhaps even playing a pivotal role in preventing the capture of one of the legendary beasts. This confrontation would elevate the stakes significantly for Ash, forcing him to face a more organized and dangerous criminal enterprise earlier in his journey, without the existential questions that Mewtwo's existence brought to the table. Blaine, the Cinnabar Island gym leader, would also experience a fundamentally different life. In canon, his deep connection to Mewtwo, his regret over its creation, and his subsequent efforts to protect it defined much of his character arc. Without Mewtwo, his scientific brilliance would still be undeniable, but his focus would likely remain on volcanic geology and the study of fire type Pokémon in their natural habitats. His gym challenge would still involve riddles and intense fire type battles, but the underlying melancholy and the burden of his past would be absent. He would be a more straightforward, perhaps even jollier, scientist and trainer, dedicated to understanding and challenging trainers with the raw power of his Arcanine, Magmar, and Rapidash. His Cinnabar Island would be a center for volcanic research and fire type training, free from the lingering shadow of a man made legend. The ripple effects would extend even to the narrative structure of the Pokemon movies. The very first feature film, Mewtwo Strikes Back, would, of course, never happen. This means the iconic scene where Ash turns to stone, the emotional climax of the film, would be replaced by an entirely different cinematic adventure. What would that first movie be? Perhaps a direct confrontation with Giovanni as he attempts to seize control of a different legendary, like the mythical Mew, or even a deep dive into the lore of the ancient golem like Pokemon, Regigigas, or the time traveling Celebi. The thematic core would shift from the ethics of creation to the preservation of natural balance, the dangers of human greed interfering with ancient powers, or the exploration of undiscovered regions and Pokemon. This sets a precedent for all subsequent legendary encounters in the films, framing them as interactions with primordial forces rather than confrontations with genetically engineered entities. The absence of Mewtwo also means the absence of its various forms, particularly Mega Mewtwo X and Y. These powerful Mega evolutions, introduced in Generation 6, were direct extensions of Mewtwo's canonical existence. Without the original, these forms would simply not exist, removing two incredibly potent combatants from the competitive scene in the lore of Mega Evolution. This might lead to other Pokemon gaining Mega Evolutions in their place, or perhaps a different legendary Pokemon would be selected as a poster child for the power of Mega Evolution. Rayquaza, a natural legendary, served this role in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but perhaps another, less cosmic legendary would have been pushed to the forefront. Consider the Hoenn region. While unrelated to Mewtwo directly, the themes of nature versus technology and the balance of the ecosystem are central to the conflict between Team Aqua and Team Magma and the legendary Pokemon Groudon and Kyogre. Without Mewtwo's precedent, the scientific community, particularly the Devon Corporation, might be more cautious with their bioengineering projects. Perhaps the weather changing devices or the energy conversion technology would be developed with an even greater emphasis on environmental impact and control. Ash's journey through Hoenn would retain its core elements, like his bond with Trico and the defeat of the evil teams. However, the underlying message about respecting nature's power might resonate even more strongly without any prior examples of science overreaching in the form of a manufactured legendary. In Sinnoh, the focus shifts to the creation trio, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, and the very fabric of space and time. Team Galactic's motivations, driven by Cyrus's desire to create a new world, are rooted in an almost nihilistic view of the current one. While not directly tied to Mewtwo, The absence of a man made legendary might subtly alter the philosophical landscape of the scientific community that Cyrus despises. Perhaps his disdain for the existing world would be even stronger, viewing it as inherently flawed without any artificial attempts to improve or transcend it. Ash's battle against Team Galactic, culminating in the stopping of Dialga and Palkia, would play out like canon, demonstrating his courage and bond with his Pokémon, but the broader scientific context would be less tainted by a history of genetic experimentation. The Unova region, with its themes of ideals versus truth, and the legendary dragons Reshiram and Zekrom, would also be affected indirectly. N, the leader of Team Plasma, believes strongly in the liberation of Pokemon from human control. His perspective is shaped by the idea that humans exploit Pokemon. While Mewtwo's existence wasn't a direct factor in N's philosophy, the concept of a Pokemon created solely as a weapon would certainly fuel his anti-human sentiment. Without Mewtwo, N's arguments would rely solely on the exploitation of naturally occurring Pokemon, making his stance perhaps slightly less extreme, or at least less universally applicable, as the ultimate example of human cruelty would be absent. Ash's journey to foil Team Plasma and battle N would proceed like canon, as his focus is always on the bond between trainer and Pokemon, an ideal that N eventually comes to understand. Kalos introduces Mega Evolution, a natural phenomenon that enhances a Pokemon's power through a strong bond with his trainer. This mechanism is entirely consistent with a world without Mewtwo. The focus is on unlocking a Pokemon's latent potential, not artificially enhancing it. The conflict with Team Flare and their leader Lysandro, who seeks to create a beautiful world by destroying much of the existing one, is driven by his twisted ideals, not scientific overreach in the realm of creation. Ash's journey, his bond with Greninja, and the eventual mastery of the bond phenomenon would play out exactly as we know it, culminating in his epic battles against Alan and his Mega Charizard X. The absence of Mewtwo simply reinforces the idea that true strength comes from within the Pokémon and the bond it shares with its trainer. Alola introduces Z-moves, a powerful attack drawing on the trainer and Pokemon's shared energy, and the Ultra Beasts, interdimensional Pokemon that challenge the very understanding of the Pokemon world. These concepts fit perfectly into a world where natural phenomena and interdimensional exploration are the cutting edge of discovery rather than genetic engineering. The Ether Foundation, while dabbling in interdimensional research and creating Type, Null, a Pokemon designed to battle Ultra Beasts, does so out of a desire to protect the world, not to create a superweapon for conquest. Their intentions, even if misguided, are born from a defensive posture. Without Mewtwo's shadow, the ethical considerations around Type, Null might still be present, but they would exist in a vacuum without the looming precedent of a legendary clone gone rogue. Ash's Alola journey, his island challenge, and his eventual win of the Alola League would remain untouched, celebrated as a testament to friendship and the unique culture of the region. Finally, in Galar, we enter the era of Dynamax and Gigantamax, a natural phenomenon linked to specific energy sources within the region. The conflict with Chairman Rose and his plans to avert an energy crisis by awakening Eternatus is a clash of environmental concerns and corporate ambition, not genetic experimentation. The history of the Darkest Day connected to Eternatus, is an ancient natural disaster, not a man made one. Ash's rise through the World Coronation series, his ultimate victory against Leon, and his powerful Gigantamax Charizard would be the culmination of his natural journey, a testament to his bond with his Pokémon and his relentless training. The world, unburdened by the philosophical implications of Mewtwo's creation, would celebrate these achievements as pure expressions of natural power and the human Pokemon partnership. The narrative of the Pokemon world, then, would evolve differently, subtly but profoundly. The ongoing tension between science and nature would still exist, but without the ultimate example of scientific hubris that Mewtwo represented. The understanding of legendary Pokemon would remain rooted in ancient myths, natural phenomena, and the balance of ecosystems. The challenges faced by trainers and the world at large would be those of natural disasters, ancient powers, and the ever present threat of human ambition, but never the existential crisis brought about by a being created from nothing. The triumphs would be about mastering the inherent power of the natural world, forging unbreakable bonds with creatures that have evolved over millennia, and exploring the vast, diverse tapestry of life that exists. The world would be a little less complicated, a little less morally ambiguous, and perhaps, in its own way, a little more wondrous, as the focus would always remain on the incredible, naturally occurring power of Pokemon and the profound connections they share with humanity. The ultimate prize, the World Coronation Series title, would still be Ash's. His bond with Pikachu, augmented by the natural evolution of his team and his own growth, would lead him to face Leon. The final battle would be a clash of titans, with Ash's Pikachu, Lucario, Dragonite, Gengar, Sirfetch'd, and Dracovish facing off against Leon's formidable team. Pikachu, perhaps now with even more experience and an even deeper connection to Ash, forged over a journey unclouded by existential dread, would land an earth-shattering 10,000 volt thunderbolt against Leon's Gigantamax Charizard, securing the world champion title. The victory would be a pure celebration of natural talent, relentless training, and the unwavering power of friendship. And just like that, we see how one decision changed everything. If Mewtwo was never created, then Giovanni would have focused on natural legendaries. Blaine would have a simpler past. Team Rocket's downfall would be a systemic one, and Ash's journey would be a purer celebration of natural bonds, cementing the idea that the greatest power lies not in what we can create, but in what already exists and what we learn to cherish. The entire narrative of the Pokemon world would be a testament to the enduring power of nature and the profound connections between trainers and their naturally evolved partners. The fabled Mega Greninja might have still emerged, a symbol of a trainer pushing natural bonds to their absolute limit, but the philosophical questions surrounding creation and purpose would never cloud its incredible power. The absence of Mewtwo, a being born of scientific ambition, would profoundly reshape the narrative arc of the Indigo League and beyond, particularly for Ash Ketchum. In canon, Ash's initial encounter with Mewtwo, albeit a brief and non-confrontational one in the first movie, sets a subtle, almost subconscious precedent about the limits of natural power versus manufactured power. Without Mewtwo, this philosophical seed is never planted. Ash's focus, and indeed the focus of the entire Pokemon world, would remain squarely on the power inherent in naturally occurring Pokemon their natural evolution, and the bonds forged through mutual respect and training. Consider the events leading up to the Indigo League. Ash's journey through Kanto would play out much like canon, collecting badges, battling rivals, and learning fundamental lessons about being a trainer. The battles against Brock, Misty, Latyrius Surge, Erica, Janine, Sabrina, Blaine, and Giovanni for the Earth Badge would unfold with the same intensity. However, Blaine's gym, without the shadow of the Mewtwo project, would simply be a challenging fire-type gym, perhaps with a more straightforward, less haunted backstory. His passion for volcanic Pokémon and the Cinnabar Island gym would be his sole defining characteristic rather than his past connection to the research facility. The Indigo League itself would proceed as we know it, with Ash navigating the rounds, facing off against Mandy, Pete, Richie, and ultimately losing to Richie in the top 16. This loss, pivotal for Ash's growth, would still sting, driving him to improve. The learning curve, the realization that he still has much to learn, would remain intact. What would be different is the underlying philosophical framework. There would be no whispers of a most powerful Pokémon that was engineered, no ultimate apex predator that wasn't born of the earth. The pinnacle of power would still be reserved for legendary Pokémon like Mew, who exist in balance with nature, not outside it. As Ash progresses into the Johto region, the narrative would continue to emphasize natural discovery and historical legend. Lugia and Ho-Oh, the legendary beasts, and the mysteries of the unknown would captivate trainers, playing out like canon. The focus would be on understanding their ancient roles and their connection to the world's natural order. Team Rocket's schemes, though still aiming for world domination, would be limited by the resources they could naturally acquire or train. Their persistent attempts to capture powerful Pokémon would lack the ultimate overarching goal of controlling a Mewtwo-level creation. The Whirl Islands arc, the Goldenrod Radio Tower incident, and the Silver Conference would all proceed with the same general beats. Ash's battles against Harrison, his rival, and his eventual placement in the top 8 would be a testament to his growing skill and the strength of his natural team. The lessons learned about type matchups, strategy, and the emotional connection with his Pokémon would be central. Moving into Hoenn, the conflicts between Team Aqua and Team Magma over Groudon and Kyogre would be even more stark, highlighting the raw, untamed power of nature. These legendary Pokémon, representing the very core elements of land and sea, would serve as the ultimate examples of natural power, with no artificial equivalent to dilute their impact. Rayquaz's intervention to restore balance would reinforce this idea of a self-regulating natural world. Stephen Stone's role as the champion, with his deep knowledge of geology and his bond with powerful rock and steel types, would further ground the region's narrative in the Earth's natural formations. Ash's journey through the Hoenn League, culminating in his top 8 finish, would be a pure celebration of his growth as a trainer, with no external man-made threats overshadowing his personal progress. The Battle Frontier, a true test of a trainer's skill and adaptability, would remain a crucial arc. Ash's battles against the Frontier Brains, each with their unique philosophies and formidable Pokémon, would push him to his limits. The emotional core of this arc, Ash's struggle and eventual triumph against Brandon's legendary Reggie trio, would be amplified. This battle would stand as the ultimate challenge of natural legendary power, a pure test of skill and bond against ancient might. The offer to become a frontier brain, which Ash declines in canon, would still be extended, a recognition of his inherent strength and connection to his Pokémon, untainted by any artificial influences. Sinnoh would bring forward the lore of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, the creators of time, space, and antimatter. Cyrus's ambitions to recreate the world would still be present, but the ultimate weapon he seeks to control would be these natural deities, not a manufactured one. The distortion world, a realm beyond human comprehension, would underscore the vast, incomprehensible power of the universe itself. The iconic rivalry between Ash and Paul would be even more central, a clash of training philosophies. Ash's bond centric approach versus Paul's focus on raw power and efficiency. Without Mewtwo as a conceptual counterpoint, Paul's methods might seem even more starkly opposed to the prevailing naturalistic philosophy. The Sinnoh League, where Ash faces off against Tobias and his legendary Darkrai and Latios, would remain a significant challenge. Ash's valiant effort against such overwhelming natural power, even in defeat, would further solidify his dedication to his natural team and their shared strength. Unova, with its themes of ideals versus truth and the complex relationship between humans and Pokémon, would see N's philosophy of Pokémon liberation resonate even more deeply. Without a Mewtwo to point to as an example of human exploitation taken to its extreme, N's arguments would focus solely on the historical and ethical treatment of naturally existing Pokémon. Team Plasma's goal of awakening Zekrom and Reshiram, the dragons of truth and ideals, would be the highest form of power projection in this timeline, a conflict over natural, ancient forces. Ash's journey through Unova, his growth as a trainer, and his eventual top 8 finish in the Virtus Conference would follow similar beats, his team reflecting the diverse ecosystem of the region. Kalos would unfold with the saga of Team Flare and their pursuit of Zygarde's power. Lysandra's twisted vision for a beautiful world, achieved through the ultimate weapon, would still be a horrifying prospect. However, the legendary power he seeks to harness would be that of Zygarde, a natural guardian of the ecosystem, not a man-made aberration. The focus would be on Zygarde's various forms, a natural progression of power and adaptation. The bond phenomenon, a deep, natural, and almost mystical connection between trainer and Pokémon, would take on even greater significance. Ash's Greninja, powered by this unique bond, would be a pure embodiment of natural potential, unlocked through trust and friendship, without any theoretical comparison to an artificially enhanced being. The Kalos League and Ash's intense rivalry with Elan would remain a defining moment. The final clash between Ash Greninja and Mega Charizard X would be a testament to the pinnacle of natural power and bond-driven evolution, a battle for the ages that, in this timeline, Ash might potentially win, having honed his skills and understanding of natural power without the existential distractions of artificial Pokémon. This victory, if it occurred, would elevate Ash to an even higher standing, foreshadowing his eventual world championship. Alola, a region steeped in spiritual traditions and ultra-dimensional mysteries, would continue its narrative of island guardians, ultra beasts, and the deep connection between people and their environment. The trials, kahunas, and the eventual Alola League would be pure celebrations of natural strength and cultural heritage. The absence of Mewtwo would mean that the concept of an artificial legendary would never even enter the minds of the Alolan people, whose reverence for their local deities is absolute. Ash's journey to become the first Alola League champion would be a pristine victory, a testament to his adaptability and his ability to connect with Pokémon from diverse ecosystems, including the natural Ultra Beasts that appear. His Z moves, powerful manifestations of trainer and Pokémon working in perfect sync, would be seen as the ultimate expression of natural power. Finally, in the World Coronation Series, Ash's journey to become the world champion would be a culmination of all these experiences. Each region, each battle, each bond forged would contribute to a profound understanding of natural Pokemon power. The path would be clearer, the philosophy simpler. The strength lies within the Pokemon themselves and in the bond with their trainer. The emotional impact of every victory and every challenge would be heightened because there are no shortcuts, no manufactured beings to overshadow the pure, relentless effort of natural growth. The World Coronation Series final against Leon would be a true clash of natural titans. Leon, with his formidable team, would represent the absolute pinnacle of what a naturally talented trainer can achieve. Ash, with his diverse and powerful team, each member a testament to a deep, natural bond, would represent the culmination of his life's journey. His Lucario, a master of aura, would be a symbol of inherent mystical power. His Dragonite, a beast of the skies, would embody raw, untamed strength. His Gengar, a mischievous, spectral force, would represent the unseen powers of the world. Sirfetch'd, a stoic warrior, would be a testament to disciplined, natural evolution. Dracovish, a quirky but powerful ancient creature, would speak to the wonders of prehistoric life. And Pikachu, his unwavering partner, the embodiment of natural electricity and pure heart, would be the ultimate symbol of their journey. The final or earth-shattering 10,000,000 volt thunderbolt from Pikachu against Leon's Gigantamax Charizard would not just be a display of power, but a declaration. It would declare that the greatest strength comes from within, from the natural world, from the bonds forged through respect and love. The victory would resonate more deeply, a pure triumph of natural evolution, hard work, and friendship. The narrative of the Pokemon world, untainted by the moral ambiguity of manufactured life, would celebrate the inherent wonder of every single Pokemon, from the smallest Caterpie to the mightiest legendary. This world would be a place where the focus is entirely on the awe-inspiring diversity and power of natural Pokemon, where human ingenuity is channeled into understanding and appreciating rather than creating and controlling. The questions would shift from can we create life to how deeply can we understand the life that already exists. The emotional core of the journey, the bond between trainer and Pokemon, would remain paramount, but it would be a bond unburdened by the scientific hubris that created Mewtwo. The world would be purer, its challenges more fundamental, its triumphs more resonant, all because one powerful, artificial shadow never existed. The fabled Mega Greninja might have still emerged, a symbol of a trainer pushing natural bonds to their absolute limit, but the philosophical questions surrounding creation and purpose would never cloud its incredible power. The absence of Mewtwo means the very foundation of Team Rocket's most ambitious and destructive plots, as seen in the first movie and beyond, would be irrevocably altered. Without the ultimate psychic weapon, Giovanni's aspirations for world domination would need to pivot dramatically. The obsession with Mewtwo in the games, the anime, and the movies, the driving force behind countless conflicts, simply vanishes. The iconic opening of the first movie, the dramatic escape and destruction of the laboratory, the challenge to trainers, the cloning machines, all of it is erased from history. Instead of a manufactured super Pokemon, Giovanni would likely continue his pursuit of other legendary Pokemon, perhaps more aggressively. The likes of Lugia, Ho-Oh, or even the Regis might become his primary targets, but his methods would be less about scientific subjugation and more about brute force and capture, like we often see in the games. The Johto journey would also feel the ripple effects. The Whirl Islands saga, for instance, might play out differently. While Lugia is a powerful legendary, the narrative focus isn't on its creation, but its protection. Team Rocket's efforts to capture it in canon were already about harnessing its natural power, not leveraging an existing artificial one. However, without the precedent of Mewtwo's existence, the scientific community may have less advanced cloning technology, making any attempts to replicate legendary Pokemon much harder or even impossible. This means no Shadow Lugia, no Feraligatr clones, none of the more morally ambiguous scientific endeavors we see in spin off games. The ripples extend into the Hoenn region. While Team Aqua and Team Magma are concerned with Groudon and Kyogre, their motivations are environmental, not about genetic manipulation. The absence of Mewtwo wouldn't directly alter their initial goals. However, the broader understanding of legendary Pokemon, their power, and their place in the natural order would be less complicated. The scientific arrogance that led to Mewtwo's creation might be replaced by a more reverent, cautious approach to powerful natural phenomena. This could mean that the scientific community observing the awakening of Groudon and Kyogre might be even more hesitant to intervene, relying more on the natural balance to restore itself or seeking out ancient knowledge rather than technological solutions. Moving into Sinnoh, the creation trio of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, and Arceus itself are all entities of cosmic scale. Cyrus of Team Galactic seeks to create a new universe. His ambition is grand, but his methods, while involving powerful technology, don't rely on the existence of Mewtwo. However, the philosophical underpinnings of his desire for a new world, one without spirit, might be met with less scientific counterargument. If the extreme example of Mewtwo's sentience and suffering wasn't there to serve as a cautionary tale. The moral discussions surrounding creation and purpose, which often echo Mewtwo's plight, would simply not be as prevalent. The scientific community might not be as cautious about manipulating space-time if they hadn't seen the catastrophic consequences of manipulating life itself. Unova, with its focus on ideals and truths through Reshiram and Zekrom, also presents a different landscape. N's philosophy, deeply rooted in the suffering of Pokémon and the ethical implications of human-Pokémon interaction, would be profoundly shaped. Without Mewtwo, the ultimate example of a Pokémon created for human ends and then betrayed, N's arguments might lose some of their sharpest edges. His empathy would still be there, but the most extreme case study of scientific overreach would be absent. Team Plasma's initial goals of liberating Pokémon, while still radical, would lack the potent symbol of Mewtwo's rebellion against its creators. Getsus would still be manipulative, but his rhetoric would have to lean on different examples of human cruelty. The entire P2 laboratory plot, centered around genes and artificial Pokémon, would likely be altered or removed entirely, as its premise is built on the same kind of scientific hubris that created Mewtwo. Kalos brings mega evolution into play, a natural phenomenon tied to the bonds between trainer and Pokémon. This is a stark counterpoint to the artificiality of Mewtwo. In this timeline, the wonder and mystery surrounding mega evolution would be even more pronounced, as there would be no existing high profile artificial Pokemon to draw comparisons. The awe of seeing a powerful Pokemon transform through its natural bond would be untainted by any philosophical baggage about manufactured power. Lysandra's goals of destroying the world and creating a beautiful new one would remain, but the tools at his disposal and the philosophical context for his actions would be different. He might still seek to use the ultimate weapon, but the shadow of another created being would not hang over the discourse of natural versus artificial power. Alola introduces Z moves and the Ultra Beasts, creatures from another dimension. This arc, like Kalos, is primarily about natural phenomena and interdimensional travel. The Ultra Beasts, while alien, are naturally occurring species from their own ecosystems. The Ether Foundation's research into them, while sometimes morally ambiguous, is about understanding and controlling existing life, not creating it. The existence of Mewtwo would not have directly impacted this narrative, but its absence would mean that the scientific community, particularly someone like Professor Lusamine, might approach the Ultra Beasts with a less aggressive, more observational stance, given the lack of a cautionary tale about genetic manipulation resulting in a powerful, dangerous, and resentful being. The fear of the unknown would still be present, but the specific fear of a created being turning on its creators would be missing. Finally, in Galar, we have Dynamax and Gigantamax, another natural phenomenon tied to specific energy sources within the region. Chairman Rose's actions, while destructive, are driven by a desire to secure the future energy supply for Galar, not by creating a new life form. The legend of Eternatus, a cosmic entity that brought Dynamax to Galar, is also a natural, albeit powerful force. The absence of Mewtwo means that the themes of natural power versus artificial power would be less explicitly contrasted. Instead, the focus would remain solely on understanding and managing the vast, inherent natural energies of the world. The questions surrounding the ethics of scientific advancement would still exist, but they would center on resource management and environmental impact rather than the creation of sentient beings. The entire landscape of legendary Pokémon research would be different. Without Mewtwo, the study of genetics in the Pokémon world would likely be more focused on understanding existing species, their evolutionary paths, and their unique abilities. The ethical boundaries of genetic engineering might not be as thoroughly explored or as strictly enforced if the ultimate cautionary tale of Mewtwo never occurred. This could lead to a different trajectory for technological advancement within the Pokémon world. Perhaps more resources would be poured into understanding ancient civilizations and their relationship with legendary Pokémon, or into exploring new dimensions, rather than trying to replicate or create life. The very concept of what a legendary Pokémon represents would be subtly altered. Mewtwo, being a legend created by humans, blurs the line between the divine and the man-made. Without it, legendary Pokemon would universally be seen as beings of immense natural power, often tied to creation myths, natural forces, or cosmic phenomena. This would reinforce their mystique and their role as guardians or embodiments of the natural world, rather than objects of scientific ambition. The inherent respect for these powerful beings would be less complicated, less tinged with the hubris of human intervention. Team Rocket, without Mewtwo, would likely never achieve the same level of notoriety or threat. Their reliance on Giovanni's brute strength and cunning, coupled with the power of natural Pokemon, would define them. The first movie, instead of being about Mewtwo's rebellion, might have been about Giovanni trying to unleash a controlled legendary, perhaps a Zapdos or an Articuno, to terrorize Kanto. The stakes would still be high, but the philosophical depth and the tragic undertones of Mewtwo's story would be replaced by a more straightforward tale of good versus evil, natural power versus human greed. The psychological impact on the characters would also be immense. Dr. Fuji, the lead scientist behind Mewtwo's creation, would never suffer the immense guilt and regret associated with his actions. He might pursue other, less ethically fraught, scientific endeavors, or perhaps dedicate his life to a different field entirely. The scientists working on Mewtwo's project would never have faced the moral dilemma of creating a sentient being for destructive purposes. The collective scientific conscience of the Pokemon world would be spared this particular burden. Even the everyday trainer's perspective on Pokemon would be subtly different. The idea that a Pokemon could be made rather than born would be less prevalent, reinforcing the inherent value and natural origin of all Pokemon. The bond between trainer and Pokemon would primarily be seen as an organic connection, not one that could be synthetically replicated or manipulated. This would strengthen the core message of the entire franchise, that the true power of a Pokemon lies in the unique connection it shares with its trainer, a connection that can never be artificially manufactured. The world would be purer, its challenges more fundamental, its triumphs more resonant, all because one powerful, artificial shadow never existed. The fabled Mega Greninja might have still emerged, a symbol of a trainer pushing natural bonds to their absolute limit, but the philosophical questions surrounding creation and purpose would never cloud its incredible power. And just like that, we to say how one decision changed everything. If Mewtwo was never created, then Giovanni would have remained a more traditional crime boss. The first movie would have focused on a natural legendary, and the dialogue around artificial life and ethics would be profoundly reshaped, leading to a world where the inherent wonder of every natural Pokemon shines even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. The ripples of Mewtwo's non existence extend far beyond Team Rocket and the immediate scientific community. Consider the impact on individual trainers, particularly those who encountered Mewtwo or were profoundly shaped by its actions in canon. Gary Oak, for instance, had a brief but impactful encounter with Mewtwo in the anime's special Mewtwo Returns. Without that experience, would his journey of self-discovery and his eventual career as a Pokemon researcher unfold precisely as we know it? It is plausible that his scientific pursuits will still be driven by a thirst for knowledge, an Oak family trait, but perhaps his focus would be solely on natural phenomena, less on the fringes of genetic manipulation or the ethical considerations of artificial life that Mewtwo's existence thrust upon him. His respect for the natural world, already strong, might become even more pronounced. His research, purely dedicated to understanding the intricate balance of ecosystems and the unadulterated power of wild Pokémon. Ash Ketchum's journey, while not directly defined by Mewtwo until much later, would also feel the subtle shifts. The first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, features Ash and his friends playing a pivotal role in confronting Mewtwo and its clones. Without Mewtwo, the entire plot of that movie dissolves. Instead of battling incredibly powerful clones and witnessing Mewtwo's existential crisis, Ash would be involved in a different adventure, perhaps one focused on stopping Giovanni's attempts to capture a legendary bird like Zapdos to power his criminal empire. This would still involve high stakes and heroic action, playing out like canon in terms of Ash's bravery and his unwavering belief in the bond between Pokemon and trainer. However, the profound, almost spiritual lesson about the value of life, both natural and artificial, that Mewtwo imparts would be absent. Ash would still learn valuable lessons about courage and friendship, but not the specific nuanced understanding of identity and sentience that came from confronting Mewtwo. His worldview, while still optimistic, would lack that particular philosophical depth. The later return of Mewtwo in Genesect and The Legend Awakened would also be erased. That movie features a different Mewtwo, one that is benevolent and protective, but still a product of genetic engineering. Without the precedent of the original Mewtwo, the concept of cloning a legendary, even for potentially good purposes, might never be explored. The Genesect, an ancient Pokémon revived and weaponized, would likely remain the primary artificial threat, but even their story would unfold without the counterpoint of a benevolent artificial being. The moral complexity of that film, involving the conflict between natural evolution and human intervention, would lose a significant layer without Mewtwo's perspective. Consider the narrative impact on the broader Pokémon world. The concept of powerful man-made Pokémon would be largely absent from the global consciousness. This means that other artificial Pokémon like Porygon would still exist, but they would be viewed purely as technological constructs, not as living beings with the potential for sentience or self-awareness. The fear and awe associated with a Pokémon created solely for battle, surpassing even natural legendaries in raw power, would simply not be a factor. This absence would allow the natural legendaries to retain their singular mystique and power, unchallenged by a synthetic rival. The reverence for ancient mythical Pokémon, like Arceus or Rayquaza, would be even more pronounced, as they would stand unchallenged as the apex of Pokémon power, their existence unmarred by the shadow of a human-made rival. The ethical committees that would undoubtedly form around advanced Pokémon research would have a very different mandate. Instead of grappling with the implications of creating sentient life, they would focus on responsible breeding practices, environmental conservation, and the ethical use of technology in Pokémon enhancement. The lines between natural and artificial would remain clear and distinct, preventing many of the moral quandaries that Mewtwo's existence provoked. The entire narrative surrounding the potential for human hubris in attempting to play God would be significantly diminished. This would create a world where human innovation in the Pokémon sphere is largely seen as beneficial, focusing on aids for trainers, improved care for Pokémon, and scientific discovery within natural boundaries. Moving chronologically through the regions, let's consider what this absence means for later antagonists and their schemes. In the Hoenn region, Team Aqua and Team Magma's goals revolve around controlling Kyogre and Gruden to expand land or sea. Their methods are environmentally destructive, but they don't rely on artificial Pokemon. This plays out like canon. However, the precedent of Mewtwo's power, even if not directly involved, could subtly influence the scale of their ambitions or the perceived threat they pose. Without Mewtwo, their plots might seem even more audacious, as the concept of artificially exceeding a legendary's power would be less ingrained. In Sinnoh, Team Galactic's manipulation of Dialga and Palkia to create a new universe also plays out like canon, again without the direct involvement of artificial Pokemon. Cyrus's nihilistic philosophy, however, might have been subtly different. When he sought to erase emotions and create a world without spirit, a world where he was the only being capable of thought. The existence of a sentient, powerful artificial being like Mewtwo might have offered a different path or a different target for his twisted ambitions. Perhaps he would have sought to replicate Mewtwo's creation, viewing it as a shortcut to his desired outcome, or conversely, he might have been even more repulsed by the idea of artificial life, seeing it as another flaw in the current universe. Without Mewtwo, his focus remains purely on the natural legendaries and the fabric of space-time. Unova introduces Team Plasma, whose initial goal is to liberate Pokémon from trainers, arguing that Pokémon are happier without human interference. This plays out like canon. A central figure in Team Plasma has a deep connection with Pokémon and can understand their hearts. His beliefs are rooted in respect for natural Pokémon. The idea of an artificially created Pokémon would likely be anathema to his philosophy. Indeed, the very existence of Mewtwo might have strengthened, or at least complicated, Team Plasma's arguments. Without Mewtwo, their focus remains purely on the natural relationship between humans and Pokémon, unburdened by the complexities of artificial sentience. And Kalos, with its emphasis on mega evolution in the ancient war, involves Zygarde in the ultimate weapon. Lysandra's plan to restore the world to a beautiful state by eliminating most life might have been influenced by the idea of genetic manipulation had Mewtwo existed. Without Mewtwo, his focus remains on the ultimate weapon and the existing legendary Pokémon. The scientific community within Kalos, especially those studying mega evolution, would continue their research without the ethical shadow of Mewtwo's creation. Their breakthroughs would be seen as extensions of natural Pokémon power, not attempts to create it. Alola's challenges revolve around Ultra Beasts and the fabric of reality. The Ether Foundation, under Lusamine, seeks to open Ultra Wormholes and control Ultra Beasts. This storyline plays out like canon, with no direct connection to artificial Pokémon. However, the scientific exploration of parallel dimensions and unknown species might have been influenced by the existence of Mewtwo had it been created. The idea of pushing scientific boundaries, even recklessly, might have gained momentum from the success, or perceived success, of Mewtwo's creation. Without Mewtwo, the focus remains purely on the mysteries of the ultra wormholes and interdimensional travel. The Galar region introduces Dynamax and Gigantamax and the legend of the Darkest Day. Chairman Rose and his plans to harness Eternatus for energy are driven by a long term vision for Galar's future. This narrative plays out like canon. The focus is on natural energy sources and the manipulation of existing powerful Pokémon. Again, the absence of Mewtwo means that the scientific community in Galar, particularly those focused on energy and environmental sustainability, would operate without the specter of potentially dangerous artificial life. Their concerns would be purely ecological and technological, not bioethical. Finally, in Paldea, with its terrestrialization phenomenon and the mysteries of Area Zero, the narrative often touches on paradox Pokemon and the very nature of time and space. The existence of paradox Pokemon, living beings from different eras, blurs the lines of natural evolution in a different way. However, they are still considered natural in that they are part of a timeline, not artificially constructed. Professor Sada and Professor Turo's research, driven by their obsession with the past and future, respectively, would still unfold like canon. The introduction of artificial Pokemon into this already complex narrative of time and existence would have added an entirely new layer of ethical and philosophical debate. Without Mewtwo, the focus remains sharply on the nature of time, paradox, and the inherent power of the Paldean region itself. The trainers we meet throughout these regions, from rivals like Hop and Bede to champions like Cynthia and Leon, would all exist in a world where the ultimate power is always inherently natural. There would be no stories of cloned Pokemon, no narratives of a creature grappling with its own manufactured identity. This means that the core message of the Pokemon franchise, the beauty of the natural world, and the strength of the bond between trainer and Pokemon would be even more undiluted. The challenges faced by trainers would always come from the wild, from other trainers, or from natural phenomena, never from a being that questions its very right to exist due to its artificial origins. Even the Pokemon themselves would experience this difference. Those like Ditto, capable of transforming, or Zorua and Zoroark, masters of illusion, would retain their unique abilities without the added context of genetic replication. The concepts of natural abilities and inherent traits would be paramount. The emotional sub-arc of a younger, weaker Pokemon looking up to a naturally powerful mentor would be even more pronounced, as the source of that power would never be questioned. A Bagan aspiring to be a mighty Salamence, or a Riolu striving to master Aura, would see their goals as purely achievable through training and natural growth, not through any genetic enhancement or artificial means. The ultimate prize, the culmination of a trainer's journey, whether it be winning a regional league, becoming a champion, or even mastering a specific battle style, would always be attributed to the dedication to their natural Pokemon and their own growth as a trainer. The World Coronation Series, the pinnacle of competitive battling, would conclude with Leon, a natural prodigy, and Ash, a master of natural bonds, battling for supremacy. Their teams, infused with the power of Gigantamax, would represent the absolute peak of trained natural Pokemon power. No artificial creation would ever stand on that stage. Ash's victory against Leon, a hard-fought battle of skill and strategic brilliance, would be a testament to the power of his bonds and his naturally evolved Pokemon. The cheers would be for the inherent strength of his Pikachu, Lucario, Dragonite, Gengar, Sirfetch'd, and Dracovish, all creatures who evolved and grew through their own merit and their deep connection to their trainer. The victory would resonate even more strongly, a pure celebration of natural talent and unbreakable bonds. The world without Mewtwo would be a less complicated place, ethically speaking. The challenges would be fundamental: good versus evil, human versus nature, raw strength versus strategic brilliance. The philosophical debates that Mewtwo's existence sparked about identity, about the ethics of creation, about the very definition of a living being would simply not occur. The collective consciousness of the Pokemon world would be spared this profound existential question. The wonder of every natural Pokemon would shine even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. And just like that, we see how one decision changed everything. If Mewtwo was never created, then Giovanni would have remained a more traditional crime boss. The first movie would have focused on a natural legendary, and the dialogue around artificial life and ethics would be profoundly reshaped, leading to a world where the inherent wonder of every natural Pokemon shines even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. This absence of Mewtwo would cascade into the narrative of the first Pokemon movie, which in canon prominently features Mewtwo's existential crisis and his battle against Ash and Mew. Without Mewtwo, the central conflict of the film is fundamentally altered. Instead of Mewtwo's attempts to clone and dominate the world, a different legendary Pokemon would need to take center stage. Given the context of the Kanto region and the powerful legendaries introduced at that generation, the most logical candidate to fill this void would be a more traditional legendary, perhaps even one that in canon played a less central role. Imagine instead a narrative focused on the raw, untamed power of Zapdos, Articuno, or Moltres. The film could instead explore the delicate balance of the Kanto ecosystem, threatened by human interference, or an ambitious villain seeking to control these powerful avian legendaries. Perhaps a group like Team Rocket, under Giovanni's leadership, would attempt to harness the power of one of these legendary birds for their own nefarious purposes, forcing Ash and his friends to intervene. This would maintain the core theme of protecting Pokemon and the natural world, but without the ethical quandaries presented by Mewtwo's artificial origins. The climax would involve Ash, perhaps alongside Mew, working to calm or liberate the legendary bird, re-establishing balance. The core message of friendship and understanding between humans and Pokemon would remain, but the philosophical depth concerning artificial life would be entirely absent. The film would be a grand adventure centered on natural legendary power, a spectacle of elemental forces rather than psychological torment. The ripples of Mewtwo's non-existence extend far beyond Kanto and even beyond the animated series. In the games, particularly Pokémon Red, Blue, and Yellow, Mewtwo is a post-game challenge, a super boss lurking in Cerulean Cave. Without Mewtwo, Cerulean Cave would still exist, a dangerous labyrinth filled with high-level wild Pokémon, but its ultimate prize, the most powerful Pokémon in the game, would be missing. This would mean that the game's ultimate challenge would likely fall to Mew, or perhaps a souped-up version of the legendary birds. Players would still aspire to catch 'em all, but the thrill of capturing the singular, unique, man-made entity would be replaced by the more conventional pursuit of natural legendaries. The competitive metagame particularly in the early generations, would also shift. Mewtwo, with its unparalleled stats and diverse move pool, dominated the Uber tier. Without it, the tier would become far more open, with other legendary Pokémon like Mew or even powerful pseudo-legendaries like Dragonite rising to prominence as the undisputed kings of battle. The strategies would focus purely on natural abilities and type matchups, rather than needing to account for a created being with an unnatural power level. The lore surrounding Team Rocket, particularly Giovanni's character, would also be profoundly different. In canon, Giovanni's ambition is often tied to his desire for ultimate power, culminating in his funding of the Mewtwo project. Without this specific goal, Giovanni's motivations might remain more focused on traditional criminal enterprises, exploiting Pokemon for profit, controlling the black market, or simply expanding Team Rocket's influence through brute force and cunning. He would still be a formidable foe, but one driven by more conventional, albeit still destructive, desires. His character arc in the games, where he eventually disbands Team Rocket after his defeat at the hands of the player, might still play out, but the underlying drive for creating the strongest Pokemon would be absent, making his defeat perhaps less about a philosophical reckoning and more about a simple failure of power. The very concept of cloning in the Pokemon world would also be less prominent. While other instances of cloning appear later, like the Genesect army, which was revived from fossils, the ethical implications and the moral questions surrounding artificial life are most starkly introduced through Mewtwo. Without Mewtwo, the philosophical groundwork for questioning such creations would simply not exist in the same way. The scientific community within the Pokemon world might still pursue genetic research, but the cautionary tale of Mewtwo, a powerful being driven to rage by its own artificiality, would never be told. This could potentially lead to a world where genetic experimentation is viewed with less skepticism, perhaps even leading to other, less problematic artificial Pokemon being created down the line, but without the foundational trauma and ethical debate that Mewtwo brings. The ripple effect would even touch upon specific characters whose arcs are intertwined with Mewtwo. Take, for instance, Dr. Fuji, the lead scientist in Mewtwo's creation. Without the Mewtwo project, Dr. Fuji might never have embarked on such a morally ambiguous path, or his research into cloning might have taken a completely different, less destructive direction. His personal tragedy, his attempts to clone his deceased daughter, Amber, and the subsequent creation of Mewtwo is a core part of the first movie's backstory. Without Mewtwo, this entire tragic narrative thread simply unravels. Dr. Fuji might have remained a brilliant but less controversial geneticist, or his research might have been directed towards more benevolent medical advancements using Pokemon biology, rather than the creation of a living weapon. The psychic type, which Mewtwo so powerfully represents, would also have a different standing in the collective consciousness. While psychic types are inherently powerful, Mewtwo's existence elevates them to an almost mythical status, a symbol of overwhelming psychic potential. Without Mewtwo, Alakazam or Metagross would likely still be considered incredibly strong psychic types, but the ultimate benchmark of psychic power would be a natural one, not an artificial one. The awe and fear associated with the psychic type would derive purely from its natural manifestations, rather than from a man-made entity embodying its extreme. Consider the narrative progression through subsequent regions. While Mewtwo doesn't directly appear in every regional plot, its legacy, particularly in the minds of powerful trainers and organizations, continues to resonate. Its existence serves as a benchmark, a cautionary tale, and a coveted prize for those seeking ultimate power. Without it, the pursuit of power would likely be channeled towards other legendary Pokémon or towards the perfection of natural Pokémon abilities. The motivations of villains like Cyrus of Team Galactic, Getsus of Team Plasma, or Lysandre of Team Flare, who all seek to reshape the world or gain ultimate control, might not be directly affected, but their methods and the ultimate symbols of power they pursue would certainly be influenced. They would perhaps more relentlessly pursue the native legendaries of their respective regions, seeing them as the ultimate keys to their ambitions, rather than having the shadow of a created superweapon looming in the background. The concept of mega evolution, introduced in Kalos, would still exist and thrive. Mega Mewtwo X and Y are incredibly powerful forms, but without the original Mewtwo, these forms would obviously not materialize. This would mean fewer mega evolutions in the competitive scene, and the aesthetic and thematic impact of mega evolution would be slightly less diverse. However, the core mechanic would remain, allowing trainers to temporarily unlock dormant power within their natural Pokémon. The focus of Mega Evolution would solely be on pushing the natural limits of existing Pokémon rather than enhancing an artificial construct. This reinforces the theme of natural growth and potential that permeates a world without Mewtwo. Similarly, the introduction of Z-moves in Alola and Gigantamax in Galar would play out exactly like canon. These power-up mechanics are fundamentally tied to the natural energy of a region and the bond between trainer and Pokémon. They enhance existing Pokémon rather than creating new ones or enhancing artificial ones. So Ash's use of Gigantamax Pikachu against Leon, his Z moves with Lycanroc and Incineroar, and the eventual terastallization in Paldea would all occur as they do in canon, representing the pinnacle of natural Pokémon power and trainer bond. The absence of Mewtwo would simply ensure that the focus remains entirely on these natural phenomena and the inherent strength of the Pokémon themselves. The ethical considerations regarding the treatment of Pokémon would also be simpler. While the Pokémon world always grapples with how humans interact with and treat Pokémon, the specific debate about whether an artificially created Pokémon has the same rights or identity as a naturally born one would be entirely moot. This would allow the narratives to focus on more straightforward issues, preventing poaching, stopping environmental destruction, or fostering respectful coexistence between humans and Pokémon. The complex, almost human-level existential crisis that Mewtwo endures, and the lessons learned from it about respecting all life regardless of origin, would never be part of the collective consciousness. The moral landscape of the Pokémon world would be less complex, less nuanced, and perhaps, in some ways, less profound in its ethical explorations. The very concept of legendaries would be even more revered. In canon, Mewtwo is often grouped with legendaries due to its power, blurring the lines between natural wonder and artificial might. Without Mewtwo, the legendary Pokémon would stand alone as the undisputed, naturally occurring titans of their world, their power deriving from ancient myths, elemental forces, or cosmic origins. This would solidify their mystical status, enhancing the sense of wonder and reverence associated with every encounter with these rare and powerful beings. The pursuit of legendaries would be a quest for connection with primal forces, not a quest to tame a man made monster. The presence of the legendary Pokemon Mewtwo's genetic ancestor, would also be viewed differently. In canon, Mew is often presented as a playful, elusive creature, but its existence is inextricably linked to Mewtwo as the source material for the cloning project. Without Mewtwo, Mew would simply be a rare, mythical Pokemon, perhaps even more enigmatic and less tied to any specific scientific endeavor. Its playful nature would be its defining characteristic, unburdened by the weight of being the progenitor of a world altering experiment. Its role in the first movie, if it were to appear, would be as a pure force of nature, perhaps even a guardian, rather than the target of scientific exploitation. The Pokemon world without Mewtwo would ultimately be a world of purer, simpler power. The struggles would remain immense, the battles fierce, and the stakes high, but the underlying philosophy would be less fraught with ethical ambiguity. The triumphs would be purely those of natural talent, dedicated training, and unbreakable bonds between humans and their naturally evolved Pokemon. The ultimate prize, the culmination of a trainer's journey, whether it be winning a regional league, becoming a champion, or even mastering a specific battle style, would always be attributed to the dedication to their natural Pokemon and their own growth as a trainer. The World Coronation Series, the pinnacle of competitive battling, would conclude with Leon, a natural prodigy, and Ash, a master of natural bonds, battling for supremacy. Their teams, infused with the power of Gigantamax, would represent the absolute peak of trained, natural Pokemon power. No artificial creation would ever stand on that stage. Ash's victory against Leon, a hard fought battle of skill and strategic brilliance, would be a testament to the power of his bonds and his naturally evolved Pokemon. The cheers would be for the inherent strength of his Pikachu, Lucario, Dragonite, Gengar, Sirfetch'd, and Dracovish, all creatures who evolved and grew through their own merit and their deep connection to their trainer. The victory would resonate even more strongly, a pure celebration of natural talent and unbreakable bonds. The world without Mewtwo would be a less complicated place, ethically speaking. The challenges would be fundamental, good versus evil, human versus nature, raw strength versus strategic brilliance. The philosophical debates that Mewtwo's existence sparked about identity, about the ethics of creation, about the very definition of a living being would simply not occur. The collective consciousness of the Pokemon world would be spared this profound existential question. The wonder of every natural Pokemon would shine even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. And just like that, we see how one decision changed everything. If Mewtwo was never created, then Giovanni would have remained a more traditional crime boss. The first movie would have focused on a natural legendary, and the dialogue around artificial life and ethics would be profoundly reshaped, leading to a world where the inherent wonder of every natural Pokemon shines even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. The absence of Mewtwo means a reshaped Kanto and Johto. Giovanni, without the ultimate weapon or the trauma of its loss, would likely continue as the undisputed leader of Team Rocket, perhaps even more focused and ruthless in his pursuit of rare and powerful natural Pokémon. His ambition might lead him to target other legendary Pokémon more directly, perhaps even trying to capture Articuno, Zapdos, or Moltres in a more sustained and organized fashion than in canon. This persistent threat would elevate the stakes for Ash and his friends throughout their Kanto journey. The Saffron City Gym, instead of being a mere stop on the badge quest, might become a battleground for control of the city, with Giovanni using his natural strength and influence to attempt to seize it outright. Ash's encounter with the Team Rocket boss would be less about a fleeting skirmish and more about a direct confrontation against a formidable criminal mastermind. The gym battle itself, instead of being a relatively straightforward affair against Sabrina, might be interrupted by Team Rocket's machinations, forcing Ash to team up with the gym leader to repel the threat. This would forge an unexpected alliance, showcasing a different kind of heroism from Ash, one not just about battling for badges, but about protecting the innocent. Without Mewtwo's existence, the narrative around legendary Pokémon would shift. The focus would be entirely on their natural majesty and the balance they maintain in the world. Lugia and Ho-Oh in particular would retain their profound mystery and spiritual significance without the shadow of a man-made legend. The Johto journey, especially the storyline involving the Whirl Islands and the search for Lugia, would take on an even greater weight. Ash's encounters with these magnificent creatures would emphasize respect and understanding rather than the awe mixed with fear that Mewtwo often evoked. The Silver and Gold Conference, the Johto League, would also see a different set of challengers. Without the powerful, game-changing presence of Mewtwo, the metas of competitive battling would be entirely centered on natural Pokémon. Trainers like Harrison, instead of hinting at legendary encounters from other regions, would have their teams built entirely from Pokémon available through natural means, showcasing the depth and diversity of the Johto region's natural ecosystem. The Advanced Generation series in Hoenn would continue much like canon, as Mewtwo's direct influence didn't extend there. However, the precedent of a naturally evolving world, free from the existential questions of artificial life, would subtly color the perception of Team Aqua and Team Magma's actions. Their attempts to control Kyogre and Gruden would be seen as an even greater affront to the natural order, a pure hubris against the forces of nature, rather than a mere manipulation of powerful creatures. The consequences of their actions would resonate more deeply, as there would be no scientific solution to such a problem, only the delicate balance of the environment. Ash's journey through Hoenn, culminating in his battle against Tyson in the Evergrande Conference, would be a testament to his growing bond with his natural Pokémon, including his Sceptile and Swellow. Tyson's Meowth, a surprisingly powerful and strategic Pokémon, would still present a formidable challenge, but the victory, when it came, would be a pure celebration of natural talent and dedication. The Battle Frontier, another pivotal arc for Ash, would likewise play out with a slightly altered understanding of power. The Frontier Brains, masters of unique battle styles, would exemplify the various ways natural Pokémon could be trained and utilized. Brandon's Regis, revered as ancient and powerful, would represent the zenith of natural legendaries, their power undiluted by any artificial counterpart. Ash's eventual triumph over Brandon Sealing his victory over the battle frontier would be a testament to his ability to adapt and overcome with his natural team, including the formidable Skeptal and Charizard, the latter finally returning to his side and fully realizing his potential after years of training. Sinnoh, a region steeped in the lore of creation and time, would be particularly impacted by Mewtwo's absence. The mythos surrounding Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, the very architects of the world, would be even more sacred. Cyrus's ambitions for Team Galactic to recreate the world in his image would be viewed as an even more profound blasphemy against the natural order. Without the concept of an artificially created being, the idea of a human trying to manipulate the fabric of existence would be seen as wholly unprecedented and terrifying. Ash's journey with Dawn and Brock would emphasize the importance of preserving the natural balance. His rivalry with Paul, a trainer who pushed his Pokémon to their limits through rigorous and often harsh training, would showcase the stark contrast between two philosophies of natural power. The emotional climax of their rivalry, their full battle in the Lily of the Valley Conference, would be an even more poignant display of Ash's unwavering belief in the natural bond between trainer and Pokémon. His Infernape, a Pokémon that thrived under his care after being abandoned by Paul, would secure the win against Paul's Electivire, a powerful display of natural growth and trust rather than raw, forced strength. Unova, with its themes of ideals and truth, would also experience a subtle shift. Team Plasma's goal of liberating Pokémon, while ostensibly noble, would be seen as an even greater perversion of natural relationships. N's connection with Zekrom or Reshiram, the legendary dragons of truth and ideals, would be a pure, unadulterated bond, free from the implications of scientifically engineered power. The Nimbasa City Battle Subway, the Pokemon World Tournament, and the various gym challenges would all continue to develop and test trainers based on their ability to work with and understand their natural Pokemon. Ash's journey through Unova, despite his eventual loss in the Virtress Conference, would still be a vital learning experience, reinforcing his natural approach to training and battling. His Unfezant, Crocodile, Pignite, and Oshawott would grow significantly, preparing him for future challenges. Kalos, home to Mega Evolution, would demonstrate the absolute pinnacle of natural power augmentation. Mega Evolution, a temporary transformation fueled by the deep bond between trainer and Pokemon and the energy of Keystones and Megastones, would be celebrated as a profound natural phenomenon. It would be seen as the ultimate expression of trust and unity rather than a scientific breakthrough. Lysandra's use of the ultimate weapon to purify the world would be an even more horrific act against nature, an attempt to impose artificial order on a naturally evolving world. The showdown with Team Flare would be a testament to the power of natural bonds and the inherent strength of Pokémon like Ash's Greninja, who without the presence of an artificial super being would be seen as a truly unparalleled force of nature. The bond phenomenon that Ash shares with Greninja, a unique and naturally occurring synergy, would be the undisputed peak of trainer-Pokemon connection. Alain's Mega Charizard X, a powerhouse born from intense training and a strong bond, would become the ultimate rival for Ash's Greninja, a battle between two naturally evolved pinnacles of power. Their clash in the Lumiose Conference Final, a battle for the ages, would be an even more definitive statement on the raw, unadulterated power of natural Pokémon and the bonds they share with their trainers. Galan's victory would be a testament to his dedication, but Ash's Greninja would still be recognized as a unique and powerful entity, a natural marvel. Alola, with its emphasis on island traditions and guardian deities, would be largely unaffected in its core narrative, as Mewtwo was not a central figure. The Ultra Beasts, as interdimensional natural phenomena, would continue to challenge the understanding of the Pokemon world, but the philosophical questions surrounding their existence would remain distinct from those posed by artificial creation. Ash's journey through the island challenge, his Z move mastery, and his eventual victory in the Alola League would be a pure celebration of his connections with his Alolan team, including Lycanroc, Incineroar, Rowlet, and Melmetal, a naturally occurrence mythical Pokemon. His victory, the first league win of his career, would be a triumphant validation of his natural training philosophy. Finally, the World Coronation series in Journeys would be the ultimate stage for natural Pokemon. Trainers from across all regions, showcasing their naturally acquired and trained Pokemon, would compete for the title of Monarch. Raihan's Duraludon, Leon's Charizard, and Cynthia's Garchomp would all represent the absolute peak of their species, honed through dedication and battle. The absence of Mewtwo means that the conversation around power would remain firmly rooted in the natural world. The scientific community would perhaps focus more on understanding the natural phenomena of Pokemon, their biology, their habitats, and their unique abilities, rather than attempting to replicate or create them. The ethical considerations would revolve around conservation, responsible training, and the protection of natural habitats, rather than the moral implications of genetic engineering. Ash's ascent through the World Coronation series, culminating in his epic final battle against Leon, would be the ultimate vindication of his journey. His team, comprising his loyal Pikachu, the powerful Lucario, the mighty Dragonite, the mischievous Gengar, the stoic Sirfetch'd, and the fierce Dracovish, would be a testament to the diverse and incredible power of naturally occurring Pokemon. The Gigantamax forms, a natural phenomenon of the Galar region, would elevate the spectacle, showcasing the raw, untamed power of these creatures in their most impressive forms. Ash's victory, securing his place as the world monarch, would be an even more profound declaration. The true strength comes from the bonds forged through natural growth, mutual respect, and unwavering dedication. Without the existential shadow of Mewtwo, the entire Pokemon world would celebrate this victory as a pure, unadulterated triumph of natural talent, hard work, and the unbreakable spirit of both trainer and Pokemon. The wonder of every natural Pokemon would shine even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. And just like that, we see how one decision changed everything. If Mewtwo was never created, then Giovanni would have remained a more traditional crime boss. The first movie would have focused on a natural legendary, and the dialogue around artificial life and ethics would be profoundly reshaped, leading to a world where the inherent wonder of every natural Pokemon shines even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. The conversation around legendaries themselves would shift. Without Mewtwo, the concept of a man-made legendary is absent. The legendaries would remain mythical, uncatchable forces of nature, their power revered as something inherent and untampered with. The stories and legends surrounding them would be purer, focusing on their roles in shaping the world, controlling the elements, or bringing balance to the ecosystem. There would be no shadow of human interference, no question of their legitimacy. This would subtly elevate the status of all legendary Pokémon, making them more enigmatic and truly divine in the eyes of the human world. The Pokédex, for example, would have no entries grappling with the concept of a Pokémon created in a lab. Its focus would remain entirely on the natural classification, behavior, and habitat of every species. The impact on Team Rocket, specifically Jesse, James, and Meowth, would be less direct but still significant. Their ultimate goal, as we know it, is often to capture rare or powerful Pokémon for Giovanni. Without the precedent of Mewtwo, Giovanni's ambitions might remain more grounded in traditional criminal enterprises, theft, extortion, and controlling trade routes. The idea of creating a super Pokemon to dominate the world would not be on his radar. This means Jesse, James, and Meowth's pursuit of Pikachu, while still a central comedic element, would be less about delivering a world conquering asset and more about delivering a powerful and unique Pokemon that could benefit Giovanni's more conventional schemes. Their failures, while still numerous, would feel less like a constant thwarting of potentially apocalyptic events and more like the bumbling antics of petty criminals. The stakes, for them, would be lower and their motivations perhaps a little less grand. The broader scientific community in the Pokemon world would also develop differently. The allure of genetic engineering, the idea of unlocking and manipulating the very essence of life, would not be as prominent. Instead, the focus might be on different fields. Perhaps a deeper dive into ecological studies, understanding the intricate relationships between Pokemon and their environments. Or perhaps a greater emphasis on evolutionary biology, unraveling the mysteries of how Pokemon adapt and change over generations. We might see more breakthroughs in understanding elemental energies without needing to create a new being to channel them. Research into mega evolution, Zib moves, and Gigantamax would be seen as explorations of natural phenomena rather than attempts to replicate or surpass them. The ethical debates would shift from the morality of artificial life to the responsibility of interacting with the natural world, ensuring biodiversity and preserving the delicate balance of ecosystems. The absence of Mewtwo also means the absence of any subsequent attempts to replicate its success or to create other artificial Pokemon on a similar scale. We wouldn't have the narrative threads that explore the ethical implications of creating life, the sentience of engineered beings, or the potential for such creations to turn against their creators. This removes a significant philosophical layer from the Pokemon world, simplifying the moral landscape. The focus would remain squarely on the natural order, the inherent power and wonder of naturally occurring Pokemon, and the relationship between humans and these creatures as it exists in the wild. Consider the various movies. The first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, is entirely predicated on Mewtwo's existence. Without Mewtwo, this movie does not happen. Instead, the first major cinematic Pokemon adventure would likely involve a different legendary, perhaps a natural disaster caused by a rampaging Gruden or Kyogre requiring Ash and his friends to mediate, or an ancient prophecy involving Lugia or Ho-Oh guiding them on a quest. The themes would shift from identity and purpose of artificial life to ecological balance, ancient legends, or the inherent power of nature. This would set a very different precedent for the tone and scope of future Pokemon films, grounding them more firmly in the mystical and natural elements of the world rather than the scientific and ethical. The ripple effect extends to the Pokemon themselves. While Mewtwo is a unique case, its existence and the technology that created it might have inadvertently spurred some of the more advanced technological developments seen in the Pokemon world. Without that initial scientific push, some devices might not exist, or they might be developed much later. For instance, the advanced cloning technology seen in the first movie, while specifically used for Mewtwo, implies a level of genetic understanding that might have had broader applications. Without Mewtwo as the ultimate project, perhaps that particular branch of scientific inquiry would not have been pursued with such intensity, or perhaps not at all. This is a subtle point, as much of Pokemon technology seems to exist independently, but it's worth considering the potential for tangential scientific advancements being inspired by the pursuit of creating the ultimate Pokemon. The perception of Giovanni would also change dramatically. In canon, he is largely known as the leader of Team Rocket and the creator of Mewtwo, with his ambition often tied to this artificial Pokemon. Without Mewtwo, his criminal empire would be the primary focus. He would be seen as a powerful, ruthless crime boss, but perhaps not as an individual with a god complex or a desire to control life itself. His menace would stem from his control over the criminal underworld, his manipulation of resources, and his sheer power and influence within the Kanto region, rather than from his creation of a legendary. This might make him a more conventional antagonist, albeit still a formidable one. His motivations would be more about power and wealth in the traditional sense, rather than the more existential threat posed by Mewtwo. The Pokemon League itself, and the competitive scene, would also be subtly different. While Mewtwo never directly participated in official league battles in canon, its existence establishes a benchmark of power that influences the perception of what is possible. Without Mewtwo, the strongest Pokemon would always be a natural one, whether it be a legendary or a perfectly trained pseudo-legendary, like Dragonite or Tyranitar. The conversations around competitive viability would be entirely focused on natural abilities, careful breeding, and training techniques. There would be no what if a Mewtwo entered the league, hypothetical, removing a layer of theoretical power from the competitive landscape. The World Coronation series, as discussed, would be a pure celebration of natural talent. Even the lore surrounding certain ancient Pokemon or extinct species might be slightly altered. If the scientific community isn't as focused on creation, perhaps they are more focused on revival. The fossil Pokemon, for instance, are brought back through scientific means. This process is distinct from genetic engineering, but the general scientific ethos might be different. Without the allure of creating new life, the emphasis on reviving ancient life might be even stronger, seen as a way to understand the natural history of the world. The ethical considerations around reviving extinct species and their place in the modern ecosystem would be a prominent discussion point, rather than being overshadowed by the debate around artificial Pokemon. The development of the Pokemon universe in games would also reflect this. While the games often diverge from the anime, the core concepts remain. Without Mewtwo, the narrative arc of Giovanni in Pokemon Red and Blue would be different. While he would still be the leader of Team Rocket and a formidable gym leader, his ultimate ambition might not be as grand. The focus would be on dismantling his criminal organization and his gym without the underlying threat of a super Pokemon. The post game content involving tracking down Mewtwo in Cerulean Cave would, of course, be absent. This would leave a void that might be filled by other legendary encounters, perhaps a more extensive quest involving the legendary birds, Moltres, Articuno, and Zapdos, or even the introduction of a new, natural legendary for players to discover in the post game. The psychological impact on the characters who encounter Mewtwo in canon would be removed. Ash, Misty, and Brock's encounter with Mewtwo in the first movie and their subsequent understanding of its pain and existential crisis would never happen. This means they would not have that particular formative experience of grappling with the ethics of creation and the suffering of artificial life. Their worldview would remain centered on the natural world, and their empathy would be directed solely towards naturally occurring Pokemon. This isn't necessarily a negative, but it means a specific type of growth and understanding would be absent from their journey. The absence of Mewtwo also means that the concept of a clone in the Pokemon world might not be as prevalent or as accepted. The clone Pokemon seen in the first movie, created by Mewtwo, would obviously not exist. This removes a narrative avenue for exploring identity through replication. While Ditto exists and can transform, the idea of a perfect genetic copy with its own consciousness is a concept introduced by Mewtwo. Without it, the uniqueness of each individual Pokemon, even within the same species, would be even more emphasized. Each Pokemon is truly one of a kind, a product of natural evolution and individual experience. The very concept of legendary as a category might be purer. In canon, some legendaries are clearly natural phenomena, creation trio, weather trio. Others are tied to specific events, Arceus, Mew, and then there's Mewtwo, which is a blend of natural origin, Mew's DNA, and artificial creation. Without Mewtwo, the line between natural and man-made legendaries would be non-existent. All legendary Pokemon would be revered as ancient, powerful, and inherently natural beings, their existence tied to the fundamental forces of the Pokemon world. This would likely strengthen the mystical and awe-inspiring nature of all legendary Pokemon, making them truly untouchable and divine in the eyes of trainers and researchers alike. The overarching theme of the Pokemon franchise, often interpreted as celebrating the bond between humans and nature, would be even more pronounced. Without the distraction of artificial life, the core message would be undiluted. The power, beauty, and wonder of the natural world and the creatures that inhabit it. Every victory, every challenge overcome, would be a testament to the strength found in harmonious coexistence and natural growth. The iconic phrase, "gotta catch 'em all," would resonate purely with the idea of discovering and befriending the diverse array of natural Pokemon species without any asterisk concerning those created in a lab. The inherent wonder of every natural Pokemon would shine even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. And just like that, we see how one decision changed everything. If Mewtwo was never created, then Giovanni would have remained a more traditional crime boss. The first movie would have focused on a natural legendary, and the dialogue around artificial life and ethics would be profoundly reshaped, leading to a world where the inherent wonder of every natural Pokémon shines even brighter, unshadowed by the ultimate artificial creation. If Mewtwo was never created, then the entire philosophical and ethical landscape of the Pokemon world would be reoriented towards the natural, the organic, and the pure, leading to a deeper appreciation for the inherent diversity and power of naturally occurring Pokemon, unburdened by the complex questions of artificial sentience and the moral limits of scientific ambition, resulting in a world where the natural order reigns supreme and every naturally occurring Pokemon is celebrated as an unadulterated marvel of nature.